see you, and you'll pop up to the top of my screen. Everybody else is welcome to have video on, but you probably don't need to if you're just watching on the Zoom call. Thank you, everyone. This is March 28th. As I call the meeting to order, the time is now 6:14. My apologies for the late start. This is the nature of technology. To call it to order, I just want to acknowledge that we're gathered both here and remotely on the traditional territories of the Coast and the Straits Salish peoples. Specifically, we recognize the Lekwungen-speaking peoples known today as the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations, and that their historic connections to these lands and these waters continues to this day. Up first, we just need approval of the agenda for this regular council meeting of March 28th, moved and seconded. Any discussion, Councillor Zelka?
Thank you. You can hear me okay?
We can.
Oh, that's wonderful. Just wanted to let you know that I will be moving reconsideration of receipt of the minutes of the APC from the March 14th meeting. I do notice in 3.2 that we are moving to adopt the March 14th meeting. So I'm hoping we can do the reconsideration before 3.2 if possible, please. I spoke with Selena.
No,
excuse me.
Zelka. I'll put the reconsideration motion before 3.2. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other discussion on the agenda? All right, then all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Councillor Zelka, if you could just lower your hand so I don't get confused by whether you wish to speak again. Thank you. And moving on to item number 3.1, we have the regular council minutes of March 14th at 5:15 to be adopted, moved and seconded. Any changes or corrections on the on the 5:15 p.m.? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. So, Councillor Zelka, you wish to undertake a reconsideration of an item on the regular council meeting of March 14th. This is the receipt, correct, of the minutes?
Yes, that is correct. Thank you very much. No, I'm just trying to see what number it was on that meeting.
So I'll just give a quick overview then. I had to look this up when I heard. You can introduce my motion to reconsider a matter within 30 days. So to make the motion to reconsider, it has to be seconded.
Yes.
If it's seconded, then the individual moving the motion can state the reasons for doing so. And then I'll put the motion whether or not to reconsider to a vote, and then we'll reopen the item if it passes by a majority.
Thank you.
So go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you. I wish to move a reconsideration of the receiving of the minutes of the APC from the meeting of March 14th. That's a regular council meeting, 2022.
Thank you. This is a motion to receive. You're asking to reconsider. Is that correct?
Yes, a motion to receive, to reconsider. Yes, as I wish to vote against. I believe, if I remember correctly, everyone voted in favor.
Is there a seconder to reconsider? Go ahead. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Councillor Zelka, if you can make a brief case as to why you wish to reconsider, open this up for reconsideration.
Thank you very much. Yes, I found that as I indicated in the meeting at the time, although I didn't follow through at that time, and I do apologize, that I found that the minutes rather, I don't want to say, well, I guess really lacking. I did not understand what we were being told as council. I know there's been various discussions, really tracing all the way back to 2016.
Zelka, just briefly, your argument here is that you felt the minutes did not accurately reflect the activities of that meeting. Is that correct?
With respect to the mandate of the APC to provide advice to council, I did not understand what I was being told. Therefore, I wish to vote against. This is why I wish to reconsider the minutes with respect to, for example, the checklists and various other things we've talked about over the years.
Okay. There's no debate on a reconsideration motion, so if council wishes to reopen the motion to receive up for debate, then you will move in, vote in support of the motion to reconsider. If not, then do not vote against. So for all of those in favor of reconsideration of this item, I have Councillor Zelka, and those opposed, I have Councillor Green, Braithwaite, Appleton, Patterson, Nay, and Murdoch opposed. So that vote to reconsider, Councillor Zelka, fails.
Thank you for the opportunity.
No, thank you. I think probably the main reason for that is reconsideration does not provide any endorsement. It just essentially just says that it's being received for, it actually reflects the discussion at that meeting. So I appreciate this point. So thank you for that. So we now are back to the regular council minutes of March 14th. Can I have a mover and a seconder for adoption? Moved and seconded. Any other discussion on this? I don't see any, so I'll call the question. Councillor Zelka?
I will be voting against because I can't support the adoption of those minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Zelka opposed. That carries. We are moving on to item number 4.1, receipt of committee minutes and public hearing reports. We have special committee of the whole virtual town hall December 9th, moved and seconded. Any discussion, changes, corrections? Oh, sorry, Councillor Green.
Just in response to a comment at the last town hall, if these minutes can be located where they are easier to find for the public, is that possible? Or I think someone requested they had a tough time locating them on the website. Do you recall the comment from the last town hall the other night? So if there's anything that we can do to make them a little easier to locate, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll leave that for staff to look at, perhaps even on maybe the last year or two of town halls on the connect.oakbay.ca or something like that might be an effective way of doing that, but thank you. Any other discussion on the minutes? Councillor Zelka?
With respect to, I very much like the idea, the suggestion to put it on the connect.oakbay area of the website, or at least a link over there. Does staff need a formal motion to effect that addition to our website to make these minutes, what we heard aspect, a little more available?
No, staff are going to take that away as a to-do, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, that carries. Then we have the receipt of committee of the whole. And we can probably do, well, I'll just do them separately. Do 4.2, minutes of the committee of the whole of January 17th, moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion, corrections, changes? Not seeing any, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Then we move on to item number 4.3, special committee of the whole financial planning minutes. I think we can do all three of the minutes, February 10th, 17th, and 24th at once. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion, corrections, changes? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you for that. And then we have Heritage Commission from February 15th for receipt. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Thank you for that. Mayor's remarks. My remarks tonight will be brief. I want to just thank all of those who were able to attend, both in real time and those that watched later the town hall. Thoughtful questions, good discussion. Really appreciate council and staff supporting that very open approach to public input and conversation. Also just wanted to let people know that the remediation work is underway at Bowker Creek, and I think it just reminded me once again of the importance of that 100-year plan for making that open and more naturalized over time. And this is my last opportunity to thank Chief Darren Hughes, our fire chief, who has served with Oak Bay. Coming up this week, on March 31st, will be his last day of work, will be his 30th year to the day that he has served in Oak Bay Fire. So we're going to miss him very much, but we know that he's going to enjoy his retirement. So a big loss for Oak Bay, but I know he's still going to be very, very active in the community. He's obviously a very active Kiwanian and active in other parts of our community as well. So we'll miss him in that role. Those are all of my comments. So we now move on to the public input, comment, and question period. And I just would like to, if anybody is on the live stream, you are welcome to call the 1-855 number and hit *9 to raise your hand. If anybody is in the chambers, they can come in and speak to us. If you want to speak to something that's on the agenda tonight, we would ask that you wait until that item is on the agenda before we ask for public input. So we're looking for public input on anything of interest to you. So this is for residents of Oak Bay who have topics of interest related to Oak Bay. I guess we can take comments from anybody. They don't have to be residents. So again, I'll just make the call. If anybody wishes to speak to council on any matter related to Oak Bay, please feel free to do so. If you're online right now, you can call the 1-855 number, hit the passcode, and then once you're in, hit *9 to raise your hand, and you will show up on my screen. If you are in the Zoom call, we will be, if you hit the raise hand option under reactions in the Zoom app, then we will be able to see you there. We have our first in-person speaker, only our second in about 2 years. So welcome. If we just ask, so our procedures bylaw gives us a total of 20 minutes for public input, up to 3 minutes per speaker. So if we could just state your name and municipality of residence, and then we will start the timer. Thank you very much for coming.
Hello.
Hello.
On. My name is Rochelle Briscoe. I just live down the road. This is my service dog, Loki, for those of you who can see her. So thank you for the opportunity to address you in person this evening. Like I said, my name is Rochelle Briscoe, and I'm the owner and founder of Low Key Dog Walks, established in Fernwood in 2020. Low Key here is the reason for my business name and my passion for accessibility. I'm here representing our team of 6 professional dog walkers, growing list of clients, and the greater dog community of Victoria. We serve a number of areas in the city, including the municipality of Oak Bay. Our business offers solo and small pack walks. We focus on meeting the needs of each individual dog, as well as educating new pet guardians on responsible dog ownership. I'm here tonight for 2 reasons. The first is our desperate need for more secure, dog-only designated parks in each community that we serve, and this includes Oak Bay. As a business, we work full-time supporting new dog owners that emerged as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. At this point, many of these owners have gone back to work, and these dogs have reached their adolescent stage of 2 years. This means they require fully fenced, accessible, and unlimited use of park space to meet their needs. No time restrictions, no partial fences, and a space that is secure and separate from bikes, young children, and busy roads. By dispersing dogs into appropriately fenced parks, this would reduce conflict in popular tourist areas, such as, you guessed it, Willows Beach. The second reason I'm here is to address this conflict more directly. Before the pandemic, I had the privilege of traveling quite extensively, and I'm convinced that Oak Bay has some of the most beautiful beaches in the world. We are stewards of these beaches, and I believe the municipality has a part to play in enforcing this. As a dog owner, I understand the joys of walking along a beach with my carefree, off-leash dog. However, this is not the reality for all of our residents. Folks with disabilities, owners of reactive, leash-only dogs, and parents of young children have the right to enjoy parks and beaches without the threat of an off-leash dog. The lack of clarity and enforcement surrounding dogs on beaches gives the perception that this is actually okay, and it feeds into a sense of entitlement in the dog community. We need better communication and more effective signage to ensure that dog owners are making the right choice. Redirecting them to secure dog parks or designating portions of waterfront as dog-only beach access would be great solutions. My hope is that my presence here tonight will bring awareness to these issues and a reminder of the fact that construction of dog parks will create a safer and more inclusive community. It will encourage dogs to be in their appropriate place and allow for other members of the public to live in peace. It would also be an investment into the mental and emotional health of residents. I'm happy to avail myself as a resource going forwards in order to see this come to pass. And on behalf of myself, staff team, and clients at Low Key Dog Walks, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Briscoe and Loki, for joining us this evening.
We're going to the park now.
Thank you for joining us. I'm going to, just looking online, I don't see anybody within the Zoom app indicating they wish to speak. Thank you very much. Is there anybody else that has indicated they wish to speak? I don't see anybody on my screen, but I just want to make sure that I'm not in the process missing anybody. I don't see anybody wishing to speak, so I'm going to just keep an eye on the screen here. If any hands pop up in the next couple of minutes, I'm happy to go back. Oh no, it's fine. It's Ms. Morgan. We're just a staff member, not someone looking to speak. Oh, there's someone with a video on named Terry that's waving that wishes to speak. So if you would like to unmute and introduce yourself, you're welcome to address this in the open portion of the meeting. You would need to unmute yourself. We cannot hear you. You are muted currently. You're muted within the application.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now, yes.
Oh my God.
So
I'm not very.
if you can just state your name and municipality of residence for the record, then you have 3 minutes to address council.
Alrighty. Okay. My name is Terry Cambitas, and I am the homeowner of 1526 Beach Drive in the HCA area. Thank you very much for having me speak this evening because I wasn't informed of the issue that was coming up.
So, Ms. Camitas, we have the portion of, you're here to speak to the heritage alteration permit application, is that correct?
Yes.
So we're going to get to that item on the agenda, and we'll have public participation at that time. This is just a portion of the meeting where things that aren't on the agenda, people can address us. So we'll get to that in a few minutes, and we'll welcome you back.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Williams.
Thank you, Your Worship. We're hearing from the people on Zoom that the voices coming from council chambers are quite faint. So I'm just wondering if we can move the mics closer to our mouths when we're speaking and see if that helps.
Would it help if I turn the volume up on that a little bit? Let me try that.
Testing.
So I think we'll just have to make an effort to speak loudly and clearly. Councillor Zelka and Ney, are you able to hear us reasonably clearly now online? Okay, so we'll just make an effort to use clear and loud voices when we're in the room. Our big voices, that's right. We'll try and fill the room. So I don't see other hands raised to address this on the public input portion, so I'm happy to move on to item number 7.1. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you, Mayor. Actually, on 7.1, I do have a conflict as I am a director of the Oak Bay Tea Party Society, so I'm not sure if we want to deal with that one first. I could recuse myself and we could deal with that one first, or if we deal with it last. I'll leave that up to your discretion.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. What I'll do, I think, is have Mr. Payne introduce the overall piece. We'll ask questions on anything not related to the Tea Party, but general questions about the item, and then I'll have you recuse yourself. We'll deal with that first, and then we'll come back to the balance of things if that's amenable to the body. Thank you for that. Is there anybody else with anything they wish to have to recuse themselves on this items? No. So with that, I'll invite Mr. Payne, our Director of Financial Services, to the meeting. I believe he's here to introduce.
Good morning, or pardon me, good evening, Your Worship.
Good evening, Mr. Payne. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, so we're into our grant and aid process shortly, and that consists of first of all some preliminary motions and council receiving information about the overall dollar value and volume of applications received. And then we talk a little bit about next steps and for actual approval. This year, the district received approximately 23 applications, and the value of those totaled $94,625. We've got an overall grant and aid budget of $176,000, but a portion of that, $77,100, is allocated to the annual discretionary application. So that's what we're talking about here. After tonight's meeting, council will receive the entire grant and aid application packages, so you'll be able to see all the application details and the work sheet for council members to fill out. their
There, the last 10 seconds or so.
Okay. And how are we doing now? We're okay now?
Better just speak up a little bit. I think it may just be cutting out with a bit of a bit borderline on the audio. So just if you can speak up, then we can hear you clearly.
Yeah, you bet. Okay. So in total, there is a grant and aid overall budget of $176,000. But the portion of that that's allocated for the annual discretionary applications is $77,100. So after tonight's meeting, council received the entire grant and aid application package, which will include all of the application and their details and the worksheet for individual councillors to work out. In between now and April 18th, councillors will fill out their recommended award amounts and bring that to the committee of the whole meeting on April 18th. At that meeting, staff will then average all of the individual councillor amounts, and then council can choose to approve rewards in that amounts or other amounts. There's also a number of other recommendations in this report that relate to fee-for-service agreements, which is something council can consider for the delivery of some of the services contained within the grant and aid applications. Three organizations in particular are on our annual ongoing grant a list. That includes Oak Bay Volunteer Service Society, the Chinese Consolidated Benevolence Society, and the South Island Prosperity Partnership. So what would happen if council was in support is that you would authorize me to enter into a fee-for-service agreement, multi-year, 3-year agreement with the applicants. And then council would not see annual applications from them, but council would still provide overall budget approval for the ongoing annual discretionary, and the district would retain the ability to cancel contracts in the terms if council wanted to change that in the future. So the rationale behind that is that these applications are already in our ongoing annual GIA grant and aid budget, and it would formalize an actual fee in exchange for specific services. And it would reduce some administrative burden and time from the district staff and the applicants' staff as well, and provide stronger funding certainty for those organizations. Lastly, there's 2 actual grant and aid applications that staff are recommending get approved this year. The first one is the Oak Bay Tea Party. They've submitted an application for council to consider it in the $7,000 mark. The reason why they're not part of our normal grant and aid application process is that they're funded by a specific budget in a different budget, the district's events budget. So they're treated a little bit differently there. They do have ongoing operating funds for events such as this. And then there's also the Chinese Consolidated Benevolence Society. Typically, they receive a grant in exchange for cemetery maintenance, for Chinese cemetery maintenance. They didn't request those funds in 2021, and they are requesting a standalone grant in recognition of that for their maintenance in 2021. So that's up to council for consideration. They're also on the list for council to consider a fee-for-service agreement for ongoing operating grants, essentially. So thank you very much, Your Worship. I'm available for any questions that council may have.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. I would just ask if there's questions of council, we avoid questions related to Oak Bay Tea Party, and then we'll come back to the motions, and I'll ask after receipt for Councillor Braithwaite to leave, and we'll deal with that one issue, and then we'll deal with the rest when she comes back in. So are there any questions of councillors to Mr. Payne? I don't see hands popping up, so in that case, why don't I go through the motions here briefly. Can we just get the motion to receive out of the way, moved and seconded? Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed? Thank you. And then I'm going to come back to the other 3 in terms of the fee-for-service agreements. So first, I'm going to take the Oak Bay Tea Party. So Councillor Braithwaite, you've already stated your reason, so I'll let you recuse yourself at this point. This is a bit awkward because there's no, maybe you can, you may have to walk all the way through into the main office. Okay, thank you for that. Assistance of staff. Next, we just have that a grant be awarded to the Oakbay Tea Party. So is there a motion moved? Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. Any other discussion? Councillor Zelka?
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to, I'm very pleased to see this here, and I presume that means we're having a tea party this year, and if so, approximately when?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. The tea party will happen on the first weekend of June. I'm going from memory here. I think it's June 5th or 6th this year, if I remember correctly, but I could be wrong on that.
Excellent, thank you.
Any other discussion on this item? And of course, it is subject to public health orders, so that's the plan right now, but who knows what's going to happen, knock on wood. Don't see any other discussion, so I'm ready to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That carries. So if I could get someone to fetch Councillor Braithwaite. Well, she's being fetched. I'm just going to, someone can put the motion for the 3 fee-for-service agreements on the table. Moved and seconded. Thank you. We won't get into discussion until she gets in here. Welcome back, Councillor Braithwaite. We just have the motion to authorize the fee-for-service agreements on the table. Is there any discussion on those 3 items? I don't see any. So I'm just going to make a quick comment. Thank you, Mr. Payne, for going through this. This is something that we seem to deal with procedurally every year, and making it this way makes a lot more sense. So thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Those 3 carry. And then the last is a grant for the Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association for $3,000. Moved and seconded. Any other discussion? I just have one question for Mr. Payne, if that's okay on this. It says for 2021 cemetery maintenance. Is this maintenance that was undertaken by the Benevolent Association at Harling, or at I guess it's Harling Point? Mr. Payne?
Pardon me? Yeah, yes, Your Worship. It is for 2021 maintenance. Mind you, they have an event coming up. They mentioned that they would use the funds for this year in addition to a grounds maintenance that they have to get done this year as well.
Very good. Thank you very much, Mr. Payne. Any other discussion? Don't see any. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you for that. And that concludes item 7.1. Item number 7.2. This is a bit of an odd one, but Mr. Weber, perhaps you can give a quick, or is this Mr. Weber that will introduce this? Yeah, Mr. Weber, if you can just give a quick introduction. This is an item that we dealt with, but the motion we made was probably the wrong one to bring it back in the time that we expected. So perhaps you can give a quick overview of this procedural piece.
Yes, thank you, Worship, and good evening. Can everyone hear me all right?
You can, thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, so just as it's stated in the memo, shortly after 3150 Tarn Place went forward to Council for consideration of approval on February 28th, staff became aware that the specific wording in the motion adopted by Council would have essentially prevented it from coming back to Council for consideration of approval after the revisions were made till at least 3 months, potentially 6 months after the initial decision on February 28th. So based on that, it was our understanding that Council had maybe actually anticipated that they would be seeing the revised application sooner. And we have drafted this revised wording for the motion that we think is more in line with Council's original intent.
Thank you for that, Mr. Weber. Councillor Green? Yep, that's fine. So the motion, moving the motion, this is for receipt and for to change it to be referred to staff? Okay, thank you. I'll take the 2 together. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion on this? Don't see any. I'm just appreciative of staff for catching this and making sure that we're not in contravention of our bylaws as we bring this back. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. Then moving on to item number 8.1. This is a motion originally from Councillor Patterson related to Truth and Reconciliation. Ms. Williams, this is coming back through that from you to a memo. Perhaps I can get you to give a brief overview.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, the memo that's before you is in response to the notice of motion that Councillor Patterson had put forward back in February. And at that time, we anticipated a task force would be the resulting outcome. Given that we are not having our First Nations advisor on staff right now. That's a contracted position that council has approved in the budget. Staff wanted to propose this as an interim step, a kind of a two-phased approach, one piece that would advance without the First Nations advisor. And so that's the preliminary piece where two members of council would work as liaisons to develop this community resource tool based on what's happening in the community right now. And then that, of course, would be referred to the First Nations advisor on their arrival, and they would then pick up that piece and move on, work with the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations to refine that work into something that represents what they would like to see, and bring that back and post it on the website as a final document for the community to refer to as a resource tool.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. And Councillor Patterson, this is your initiative. Anything you wish to add?
Yes. Well, first of all, I really want to thank Ms. Williams for working with me on this. It's been a bit of a shifting picture, and I think that in the realization that, particularly myself, as I did some reach outs, I realized that I recognize shared learning and understanding isn't consistent across all groups within the community. And so I do support that it is worthwhile to take this phased approach as is outlined. My original motion did contemplate a task force, and I think that longer term, that is still something that we should be doing once we have a better understanding of all of the groups involved in the community. And can get more of a base working plan for how we would like to move forward. And it really emphasizes the spirit, I think, that I mentioned in my first motion, and that was taken from the Honourable Murray Sinclair, and that was to do our own learning first. And I think that was a wise comment from Murray Sinclair, and one that we will do well with. So I do support the motion that is put forward in Ms. Williams' report. I just would like to also add my own opinion to this, because it does say two members of council as liaisons, and I know, as I was the former liaison to the Heritage Foundation and Heritage Commission, I am not now. We have another member of council, Councillor Appleton, who is. And Heritage BC became involved in the Truth and Reconciliation actions very actively. They did roundtables back in 2019. So they have a comprehensive program already through BC Heritage. And so I strongly, and I did take the liberty of speaking in advance of this with Councillor Appleton, but I do strongly recommend that the Heritage Liaison should be one of the members appointed to this this preliminary meeting that we will have. So I giving that as advice, but nevertheless, I think it's very sound advice, and I'm glad that Councillor Appleton also welcomed that opportunity. So with that, I will turn it back to Mayor, and we can take a vote on this, and hopefully it'll be received favorably.
Thank you. You're more than welcome to make the motion, Councillor Patterson, and then we can have a discussion on it.
So then, I will recommend first that the report be received.
We can deal with that separately and quickly. I'll move and second it. Any discussion on the receipt? All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed? Thank you.
And then move the recommendation of staff as it is presented.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any other discussion on this? Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair. I very much support to this initiative, and I'm very pleased to see it coming forward. I hope everyone on council is interested in this, and certainly I am. And I was just wondering, what is the criteria for the selection of the 2 council liaisons, please, if there happens to be one?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Given the wording that's here, I would just reach out to all the members of council to see who is interested. I think one of the drivers for this format suggested is because so many people are interested. So this is really the people doing the sort of the hard work of sort of pulling people together, collating the information, those sort of pieces. So it's not. That's, I think, why this makes this so positive to my mind, is that it does include all of council in the learning stage of this process. But at the end of the day, I would have to take all the people's input and ultimately make a recommendation or appointments. And I'll certainly take the suggestions of the mover to heart on that one as well. So, Councillor Green.
Thank you. And just a question on process. So you will take all the input, then do you come back to council, or do you make the appointment straight away?
Is here to appoint, that I would appoint.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And quite quickly, I think. Any other discussion on the motion as it sits? Oh, it is subject to public input. Thank you for that. Is there anybody from the members of the public who are here who wish to speak, and anybody online who wishes to address council can do so as well. If you wish to speak to this item, I would ask if you're on the 1855 number to hit *9. That's not #9. It is *9 to raise your hand. I think we've had some issues of people hitting the wrong precursor. So *9 to raise your hand, and that'll show up here. The other option is if you're in the Zoom application, there is a reactions button at the bottom of the screen typically, and under that reactions tab it says raise hand, and that indicates that you wish to speak. So we'll take those. Anybody who wishes to speak at this point can do so. I'll give it a moment here, as we do have a bit of a propagation delay through the live stream. Any other questions of staff or Councillor Patterson before we as we're waiting? Don't see any. I'll just express my appreciation to you, Councillor Patterson, for bringing this forward, and to staff for helping to find a model that allows us to move forward quickly, but also not have it just be a one and done piece, that it's built a little bit more into our fabric of how we're going to be doing things going forward. So I think that balance is quite effective. I don't see hands popping up to address us on this item. There's someone just calling in, so I'm just going to see if someone just joined us in the meeting. If you are listening to this and you wish to address us, if you're on the phone, you can hit *9 to indicate that you wish to speak. That is *9, not pound, but *9, and that will indicate that you wish to address council on this item. We are currently, if you're just joining us and don't know, we are on item number 8.1, which is the Council Initiative for Truth and Reconciliation in Oak Bay. I don't see anybody indicating they wish to speak, so I'm going to call the question. Oh, hold on a second. Oh, no, it's not related. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Thank you very much. And moving on to item number 8.2, which is also subject to public input, although certainly not the final piece of this. This is the special committee for financial plan. Basically, this is our formal way of asking staff to draft the financial plan bylaw. So this is a chance, if anybody has any last additional comments from the public or from council, you can speak to us. So there is someone from the public who has indicated they wish to speak. I will go to you in just a moment, but first I will see if there's any questions from council to staff. I don't see any, so I'll go to, this is the caller, Councillor Zelka, and then I'll go to the caller. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
I apologize. I should be using the raise hand, but it's hard to grab that. Yes, thank you. Just through you to our Director of Financial Services, if you could just highlight the expected tax increase on the Oak Bay portion of the taxes for this year, and if we happen to know for next year as well. That would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Mr. Payne, perhaps you can give us the expected increase both as a percentage and as a dollar amount for a median household, if you have them both handy.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Just one quick moment here. The expected increase for property taxes for 2022 is 5.4%. And then we forecasted a 4.59% tax increase for 2023.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. And I will just make a note as well that the CRD just completed its budgeting process, and nicely the Oak Bay portion of that is going down as the pieces go. So this is a good year for overall expenses in Oak Bay. I have a caller from phone number that ends in 1271. So if you could just state your name and municipality of residence. You are currently unmuted and are welcome to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me all right?
We can, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and members of council and staff. Ian Graham, I'm a director of the Friends of Boker Creek Society. And I just wanted to speak briefly on a couple of items in the financial plan, if I may. Yeah, so I think I spoke to council about a year ago, on the 2021 financial plan. And I just wanted to speak to you again, just particularly in regard to the recent slope failure adjacent to the Oak Bay Rec Center. And there is a line item in the financial plan on page 106, Oak Bay Rec Center parking lot rehabilitation options, 99,000. And I think that's a carryover from the item that was in there last year for 300,000 for the repaving. And the staff note under that item is that the upper parking lot has not been repaved pending the review of Boker Creek stability considerations. And so, as we've seen over the last week, that section of the creek is very unstable. And we'd like to see that funding be recharacterized rather than parking lot rehabilitation. We'd like to see it recharacterized as creek restoration. We think that is actually the more significant issue, both in the immediate term, the costs involved in dealing with that erosion, but also the long term, the more comprehensive solution. So, that's just one comment, and we'd also like to, members of our society as well as people in the community, just like to restate our desire to see a comprehensive solution. This has been raised for many years. I've had conversations with Stuart Pitt, your former engineer from the 90s, around this section, and the concept, this comprehensive solution, that concept, it is embedded in the Boker Creek blueprint, the 2011 blueprint. And essentially it's about expanding that riparian area, addressing the slope stability, reconfiguring the parking lot, and completing that pedestrian greenway connection, which is also in your active transportation strategy from 2011, completing that connection so that all those seniors from Marriott Gardens can actually access the wonderful pathway alongside Oak Bay High School. And it's also a policy in the 2014 OCP. I just wanted to note as well that the Boker Creek, or the staff brought a really excellent report to you in June on update on the Boker Creek initiative and this daylighting feasibility study, as well as that whole district asset management program update. And both of those presentations really highlighted the importance of investing in stormwater management, as well as our natural asset management. So just wanted to, again, raise that as it's that comprehensive solution. Highlight also this whole watershed concept. So the impact of development upstream in Victoria and Saanich, right, is having an impact on what's the slope stability and the erosion down in Oak Bay. So just that aspect, and then that erosion and these slides. There was one in Saanich actually about a month ago as well, very similar, have an impact downstream. So our salmon project, the salmon eggs that were planted there. So, you know, we're doing lots of efforts downstream, and we need to sort of work our way upstream as well. And that importance of flood mitigation and stormwater detention upstream as part of the solution. So as one of Oak Bay's partners at the Boker Creek Initiative, the Friends of Boker Creek Society, we'd really love to partner with you, be more actively engaged in any plans, whether they be short-term or medium-term solutions here. And we did put out an invitation to council earlier today, you know, maybe getting some of you and some of the staff to actually walk that section and really talk about how we might advance that project. Just a quick reminder that the Boker Creek Initiative, we're a member, Oak Bay Municipality is a member, you know, went to bat and got $750,000, you know, from a federal infrastructure program for that Oak Bay High section. And, you know, I think that the conditions are really right to try and advance a similar type project along the section of the Oak Bay Rec Center. So, yeah, appreciate your time, and thanks very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. I'm just going to turn to Mr. Payne briefly on this one. I appreciate the comments. I think there's probably not necessarily a shift of funds required at this level, but we do have a natural asset management process underway. And Mr. Payne, perhaps you can just fill us in terms of the work, the remediation work on this, and future planned work on Boker Creek, where that pool of money sits within our budgeting process.
Your Worship, the caller is correct about the funding being carried forward. Last year, staff anticipated some of the issues that seem to have come to bear over the last couple of days, and so they did not proceed with that work. So the leftover funding was essentially just what was underspent, and you can see the new characterization in the financial plan is staff needed to develop options with what we're going to do going forward. So those options haven't been costed out in the financial plan, but they've certainly been put as a placeholder for council decision making. And as you mentioned, Your Worship, yes, we council in your strategic planning in fall of this year added an additional $50,000 to the stormwater master plan, which is expected to commence this year, and that's specifically for natural asset considerations, which is primarily stormwater in the district's case. So I'm sure that will include consideration of that as well.
Thank you for that, Mr. Payne. Are there any other questions, either from the public or from members of council? Don't see any, so perhaps I can look to council to give some direction here. The motion suggested is that staff prepare the 2022 to 2023 financial plan bylaw. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion on that motion? Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. And this is getting to be well trodden ground by now, but I will just call to the public's attention. If this process around the financial planning process and the direction to prepare the financial plan seems very simple and straightforward, it's only because staff have made it so. That these financial plans, I think at some point during our deliberations were mentioned that they get better every year, and just the process is so much smoother, so straightforward, and so just very, very appreciative of staff's work to prepare the plan, and also strongly encourage all members of the public, as the caller has demonstrated, has gone into the details of the financial plan and has found information relative to something that is of interest to them and relevant to their topics. I would definitely recommend that members of the public look at the financial plan closely and investigate it. Lots of great information provided. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Yeah, I think it needs to be pointed out, if people haven't looked at it in a few years, it used to be a spreadsheet, now it's a fairly readable document for the layperson. Any other discussion on the motion? Don't see any. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. So we look forward to that financial plan returning, Mr. Payne, the bylaws, I guess sometime in late April is my understanding. So moving on to section number 9, we have a couple of items that aren't subject to public input, and then we're back to public input options for the next pieces. So up first is upland siting and design and a development permit application for 3465 Beach Drive. Mr. Weber, you're on once again.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Before I go forward, there's a hand raised within the Zoom application for Mr. Akavan. Probably mispronounced that. If you wish to unmute yourself, if you could just state your name, and I'm assuming it's related to the previous item. Is that correct, Mr. Akavan?
It's related to this item that we're on right now, 9.1.
Oh, you're here as the applicant. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. You don't have to have your hand up. I will call on the proponent, on the applicant at that time. I'll go to staff first, but thank you for letting me know you're there, and please leave your video on. That's very helpful to keep it at the top of my screen.
Sure,
go ahead,
thank you.
Mr. Weber.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The District of Oak Bay is in receipt of a combined upland study and design application and development permit application to undertake renovations to an existing single-family home on the property located at 3465 Beach Drive. The property is located on the east side of Beach Drive between Midland Road and Ripon Road. It is approximately 4,096 meters squared in area, surrounded by single-family homes to the north, south, and west, and borders the ocean to the east, and has an RS1 one-family residential use zoning designation and Uplands OCP designation. The proposed works involve constructing a 96.6 meter squared three-level addition at the rear of the residence, constructing a 36.8 meter squared second-story addition to the south side of the residence, constructing a 48 meter squared deck off the rear of the residence, constructing a new covered entranceway at the front of the residence, constructing an 115.9 meter squared concrete paving stone patio at the rear of the residence, replacing an existing wood shingle open gable roof over the residence with an asphalt shingle hip roof, adding bay windows on the first and second stories of the front of the residence, repaving the existing asphalt driveway with new asphalt, and installing new landscaping around the residence. As the subject property is within an area designated as the Uplands within the district's official community plan, staff reviewed the proposal for conformance with the Uplands design guidelines and official community plan policies. Staff determined that the proposal is largely in keeping with the guidelines and policies, with the exception that the proposal requires the removal of 2 mature, healthy Gary oak trees to accommodate the proposed rear yard patio, which was found to contradict the landscaping guideline, which recommends the preservation of significant healthy trees, and an OCP uplands policy, which encourages siting new development to retain as many mature trees as possible. The Gary oaks that are proposed for removal are the only protected trees on the property requiring removal to accommodate the proposed development, and if removed, would bring the canopy cover on the site from 76% down to 71%, still exceeding the 45% canopy coverage target for the zone. The manager of park services has not consented to the removal of these trees, and as they are considered protected trees under the tree protection bylaw, they require council approval for their removal. If the removals are not granted by council, the proposed rear yard patio would need to be redesigned to accommodate the trees. And if the removals are approved, however, 4 new Gary oak tree replacement trees would be required, and Park Services has recommended that they should be planted off-site, given the existing high level of canopy cover on the property. As the subject property is additionally within an area designated as the Hazardous Conditions Development Permit area within the district's official community plan, staff further reviewed the proposal for conformance with the Hazardous Conditions Development Permit area guidelines. The guidelines require that the applicant submit a geotechnical report prepared by a professional engineer assessing the suitability of the development for the site and to recommend mitigation measures for the protection of the environment and development from hazardous conditions associated with the geological instability of the area. Staff found the proposed development to conform to the Hazardous Conditions Development Area guidelines, with the exception of a recently constructed boulder wall on the slope of the east side of the property. The construction of the wall was not supported by a geotechnical engineer and is subsequently recommended be removed to achieve conformance with the Hazardous Conditions Development Area guidelines. The application was reviewed at the February 1st, 2022 Advisory Design panel meeting and the February 1st, 2022 Advisory Planning Commission meetings. Both commissions recommended the applications be approved as proposed, but both commission members voiced concerns regarding the removal of the 2 Gary oak trees to accommodate the proposed rear yard patio. Staff recommend that the subject upland siting design and development permit applications be approved with the conditions on the development permit requiring the proposed rear yard patio to be redesigned to protect the 2 Gary oak trees, and that mitigation measures to reduce the hazards associated with the geological instability of the land noted within the attached geotechnical report dated October 28, 2021 be followed during construction, and that the recently constructed boulder wall on the east side of the property be removed. Staff are requesting council direction on this application, and the applicant, Nigel Banks, along with the property owner, who met formerly, along with myself, are available to answer any questions council may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weber. I will take questions of council. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you. And I think this question will be to staff. I read with interest on page 12 of the report the letter from the proponent. And in there it says, and I'm reading from their letter, it says, considering that there have been many incidents of trees falling on buildings in North America and killing or injuring the occupants in the recent years, we would like to simply keep trees away from the building itself. Of course, such an event would result in major liability issues that we wish to avoid, and certainly the city would not want to take that on that responsibility either. So my question is, because I read that and went, that can't be that would be the responsibility of the municipality. So I'd like to get an opinion from staff as to whether or not it would be a liability to council, because surely the trees have been there for a number of years. And if it was a liability to council, then would we not be looking at taking down trees all over the municipality?
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. I guess without getting into legal, Mr. Weber, do we, at what point do we, Ms. Varela, I'll go to you on this one.
Thank you, Your Worship. So it's hard to just give a blank answer for that. If council wanted more information on that, I would like to have time to research that. I don't like to give legal opinion on the fly.
Perhaps a simpler answer would be, are there many houses in Oak Bay with trees taller than the houses nearby? I'm assuming it's not a liability, since given that almost every house in Oak Bay is accompanied by a tree next door. But I guess you can't, from a liability perspective, not going to answer that question.
Okay, it seems like an interesting comment to make in a letter. And then my other question would be that the wall that's to be removed, that's geologically unstable, was that put in with permission, or did they need permission to put that wall in? I know we're going to ask them to take it out, but I just wonder if it was put in with permission.
Thank you. I'm not sure. Mr. Weber?
Yes, thank you, Worship. Yeah, that wall that was put in without staff's knowledge. And ideally, if that wall, it would have been ideal, I guess, if the property owner or applicant did reach out to the district in advance of constructing it, so that the district could ensure that it did conform with the development permit area guidelines for the property. And I guess for some additional context, that wall was put in after the application initially went to ADP and APC for review, and that is why staff requested the applicant provide subsequent geotechnical reports assessing the stability of the wall. And based on the information within those reports, we concluded that the wall should ideally have been constructed in accordance with drawings prepared by an engineer. And since it was not, we gave the applicant the choice of either to remove the wall and basically bring the area back to its original condition, or to have a wall designed by a professional engineer and rebuilt. And the applicant opted to remove the wall. And so that is staff's recommendation within the report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weber. And we have Mr. Banks in the room with us. It's a pleasure to see you in person, Mr. Banks. It's been a long time. You don't have to turn on your microphone just yet. We'll welcome you into the meeting here in just a second. Just going through questions of council at the moment, and then we'll come to you. Councillor Braithwaite, anything else to follow up? Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, Chair, and through you, Mayor, to Mr. Weber. Mr. Weber, thank you very much for the comprehensive report. And my question pertains to the redesign potentially of a patio to accommodate the 2 trees. Has that been discussed with the owner, and is the owner open to that suggestion. Thank you.
Since we have the applicant here, and Mr. Banks and the owner, why don't I just go directly to them to address that question? Welcome, Mr. Banks. And then, Mr. Ackerman, if you wish to add anything, I'll go to you afterwards.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, that was discussed. I guess I should emphasize that my client's concern about asking the request for removal of the trees is more generated by concern about the safety of the building. I think my client has put together a number of items for staff and council's consideration concerning the number of incidents we've had with trees. These two that are requesting removal are relatively close to the house and the deck. Certainly, as Councillor Green says, they are within the area of the sunken patio, and we did discuss the possibility of working around them. But as I say, the concern was as much or more about the safety rather than the patio itself. We have something like 71% of canopy cover after those two trees are removed. So we didn't feel that it was something that was an extraordinary request. My client has indicated they're quite willing to participate in replacement trees anywhere the Parks Department might like to have them planted.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. And have you had a chance to consider the impact of trying to readjust the question? I think was about the patio itself in terms of what that would, the viability of adjusting the patio to accommodate the trees?
Well, it could be done with a degree of difficulty, but the arborist can't guarantee that the trees would be, would manage to get through it, but it can be done. And it would involve a redesign of the building as well in terms of removing some of the lower windows, that sort of thing, or at least changing their size and proportions.
Thank you for that clarification. I don't know if the owner wishes to add anything to that question. Your hand is up in my screen, so I just I don't want to ignore you there. Did you have something to add? And if you just state your name for the and municipality of residence for the record, that would be helpful.
Yes, my name is Adib Akavan, and I'm from Ukbe. And I just wanted to address this point as well, because I saw throughout they mentioned that the removal of these trees could be resolved by redesigning the patio. And like Mr. Banks mentioned, the main concern here is safety. So we have 37 protected trees on this lot. 24 of those are oak trees. We love trees. That's one of the reasons that we got this home. These two trees in particular are of great concern for us. They're going to be 12 to 15 feet away from the home, while they're 75 and 82 feet tall. They are high above the foreshore of Cadborough Bay, and they're also facing Cadborough Bay, so they're open to the Cadborough Bay windstorms. So these are much higher risk trees than the average tree in somebody's yard may be. So yes, we are very concerned. We don't want to take on the liability. As for the legality, we are doing everything that we can in order to have these trees removed, like coming to this meeting and presenting this. Beyond that, there's nothing more that we can do. I know there were some concerns regarding who would have to take on the liability. Beyond that, we don't know. We do know that 7 instances in North America have occurred. Closer to home, where trees have fallen on residential buildings and killed the occupants inside. We don't want to take on the risk of developing this property and putting added stress on these trees in order to retain them, just so they can fall down on the same building that we're developing a year or two from now. Another thing I wanted to make note of as well was on page 8 to 9 in the design panel review. It mentions that the panel was concerned regarding the removal of the trees. Something it doesn't mention, which I wanted to say, was that what this is missing is the fact that the panel actually took a vote in order to see if they should include a suggestion to retain the trees. And the ultimate consensus of that vote was that they voted not to include the suggestion. So there was concern, but ultimately they voted against including that concern in their report. I thought that was also important to mention.
Thank you, Mr. Akaban. Councillor Green, you still have the floor.
No, thank you very much for your response, and also thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and probably through you to the applicant. The recommendation in the staff report is to redesign the patio in order to facilitate the retention of the 2 trees in question. And I think I just heard mention of that there was no guarantee that redesign of the patio would in fact avoid impacting the trees negatively. My expectation would be, if the recommendation from staff to redesign the patio in order to minimize impact or to avoid impact to the trees is followed, that it would be designed in such a way that it would not impact the trees, that it would be designed in such a way that it would avoid the sensitive root zones of the trees, and that it would be done in such a way that it would not negative, with input from district staff in order to negate that impact. That's what I read into this. So I think a redesign that resulted in a potential impact is not acceptable in my view. So I was just wondering whether the applicant could elaborate on that.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Mr. Banks, I think that's the intention of the wording of the staff recommendation, but perhaps you can touch on that.
Certainly, we've discussed the trees with staff a number of occasions since the start of the application, and I think that, no one's going to guarantee that the trees are going to survive. The only way that you could guarantee that would be to do away with the size of the addition that's on the house. And given that, in terms of the overall site, the development is relatively small in scale. We just wanted to try and be sure that my clients' needs and wishes for their home can be accommodated, but that the trees, if there was a redesign of the area in front of the house, would not then become a potential liability for the outdoor space and the deck and the patio at the lowest level.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. Anything else, Councillor Appleton?
Thank you, Worship. Could I just get in? Thank you for that. Can I get just some input from staff as to, with respect to clarifying the staff recommendation in the report, that the recommendation to retain the trees and achieve a patio redesign would be done in conjunction with the input from the district arborist, such that there would be no long-term impact to those trees. That's what I think we're trying to achieve here. Is that correct? Just from staff's perspective?
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Mr. Weber?
Thank you. Yes, that is correct. What will likely happen is that the district's arborist will work with the applicant's consulting arborist at the time of the building permit and discuss appropriate means to protect those trees, to mitigate any negative or as much as possible reduce the negative impacts to the health of those trees.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Councillor Zelka, I see you have your hand up.
Oh, can you hear me all right?
Can.
Oh, fantastic. It's amazing when my headset actually works. Thank you. So I do note on a satellite view of the area that the property next door tends to have a quite clear sight lines, and the property on the other side also has quite clear sight lines through to the water, but the building in question is quite well covered in trees. In fact, the numbers of tree coverage is quite impressive. I'm very sorry for the people in Leavenworth and in Atlanta and in San Diego who did not maintain their trees and the trees fell over. And there's nothing we can do about that. But so it's kind of interesting and a bit surprising to see so many newspaper articles from other areas, not Oak Bay, with respect to the concern that I do hear in terms of the proponent has about trees in general. I do note that just up the coast, I think it's called Arbutus Cove Park. Oh, yes, Arbutus Cove Park in Saanich, just up the coast, there was a rather large slope failure, where a number of trees came down and they fell down the slope onto the beach at the bottom of that rather a much more steeper and probably more hazardous area, I would imagine, than the area here in question. But it does appear that with the slope away, and when I review the geotechnical report, I would imagine if there was any risk, it would be a risk towards things falling towards the water as opposed to potentially falling towards the house. So the question through you, Chair, to the appropriate staff member is there a concern about slope stability if the trees are removed? Would that somehow increase the concern about slope slippage? And I know one of the concerns that we have to always take into account, and I'm sure that that's why staff did an excellent suggestion, which is to bring in the geotech, especially for this hazardous area, is that we must maintain, or we must not create. I think the technical term is we must not create a hazard. So the question is, will the removal of the trees create a hazard?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Mr. Weber.
Yes, thank you. Of course, I can't comment on it with 100% certainty because I'm not a geotechnical engineer, but based on the information within the geotechnical reports, my understanding is the primary area of concern for slope stability is more so further east of the location of the trees in question. If you look at the drawings, you will note that there is a topographical drawing map, which basically indicates that the slope is more gently sloping in the location of the trees, and then it's some distance away from that it begins to take a steeper descent downwards. And I think that's the primary, based on what I've read in the report, that is the primary area of concern, and where I guess the retention of trees is more valuable there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you so much for that. I mean, this is it's something that we're dealing with. Saanich had the failure. Bowker Creek has had a failure. We've had some unusual atmospheric rivers that have come through, creating concerns for a lot of people with respect to living anywhere near a place that might have erosion. Plus, we do know in 50 to 75 years, there also will be sea level rise and king tides to consider. So I am quite pleased that the proponent has agreed to take down the wall to ensure that there will be more stability in this hazardous area, but I'm uncomfortable with the removal of the trees. A question then through you, Chair, to staff. I don't know if we have an arborist in the crowd, but could these trees be somehow trimmed back in such a way so that the proponent would feel more comfortable?
Mr. Weber, is there anybody here to speak to that? And I'll go to Mr. Banks after if you wish to add anything.
Thank you, Worship. I'm not seeing anyone on the Zoom call here. I can't recall it if Chris Heidley mentioned that he will be attending in person tonight. And of course, I'm not qualified to speak to that as I'm not a certified arborist, but staff could certainly look into that and gather that information to you if you wish.
I would definitely be interested in hearing more about that. I do recall other proponents have also raised similar concerns about potential tree failures. Hence, they would like to take them down. And coincidentally, it also increases their view of the water. I'm not saying that that's a concern here, but in those other situations, in many cases, we denied, of course, because the Uplands is a residential park, and the idea is to maintain parks, and parks have trees. So, if there was an option to maintain the trees and deny the aspect of removal of those two trees, and ideally move forward with the OCP suggestion, which is to redesign around existing trees, that would be something that I would be leaning towards. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I just want to remind us, we're just trying to deal with questions here more than making long commentaries, just so we can address any gaps in knowledge to help guide our deliberations going forward. So if we can just keep on task, we're halfway through our meeting, and I just want to make sure we're staying on our timeline. Mr. Banks, did you want to add anything to that response?
Thank you, Your Worship. Like Councillor Zelka and Mr. Weber, I'm not an arborist, so I can't really say. No, I should not comment on that. We would have to work with both the project arborist of Talbot Mackenzie and with staff.
Thank you. I think it's a slightly irrelevant point at this point, because we're just really dealing with the removal and trust that the arborist and health of the tree will be dealt with otherwise. Councillor Patterson?
Sorry, Chair, just finishing my last comment, if I may.
Go ahead, please.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to imply that I was all done. I just read in a closer view of the geotech report, it does show a few areas where there already are slope stability issues. So these are some of the concerns that I would have. And of course, the best way to maintain slope stability is to keep your trees. So I would leave it at that for now. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And just going back to a statement made by the applicant, if I could confirm with staff that both the advisory planning commission and the design panel, although they both panels expressed concern about removal of the trees, they did not vote, my understanding is they did not vote on making a specific recommendation to council because they did not believe it to be within their mandate that the decision was made by council. Is that correct?
Mr. Weber?
Thank you. Yes, ADP specifically did mention that they did not believe it was within their mandate to, I guess, require an applicant to retain those two protected trees, and I guess deferred or refrained from making a specific motion on that, with the idea that council would be the ultimate decider on that specific aspect of this proposal. And yeah, just to clarify again, both the advisory design panel and advisory planning commission recommended the applications be approved as presented, with, I guess, the proposed tree removals.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Patterson, anything else? I just see the proponent, Mr. Akavan, just raised his hand. He wishes to address. There's a question there that you wish to add to, Mr. Akavan?
Yes, I just wanted to address the concerns regarding the slope. On page 51 of the report, it shows the layout of the land with the slope and the trees. And it actually also shows that there are 6 mature protected trees that are behind these 2 trees that are being proposed to be removed. These 6 trees, of course, would remain. These 6 trees are closer to the slope than these 2 are. Yes, I wanted to address that. And also the fact that in this strip of the uplands on Beach Drive, none of the homes have this many trees in their backyard towards the water. As far as the slope concerns go, this is one of the safest properties as far as much as trees can do to protect from erosion. These 2 trees in particular are very far back from the slope. They fall in the envelope where the building is going to occur, and the geotechnical reports concluded that that area is not of concern to the slope. So I would assume that would also apply to any trees that fall in that area.
Thank you, Mr. Akavan. Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you. It's interesting. I was looking at the lot coverage that the current house takes up, and obviously the lot coverage that's allowed in the uplands is 25%. This house, the current house, only takes up 5.7, and the proposed will take up 9.07. So my question would be, is that if this house were to be demolished and it was built to the size of footprint that it was allowed to be built to, the trees that fell within that footprint would be able to be removed no matter what, correct?
Yes, go ahead. I'll let Mr. Weber answer officially. Mr. Weber?
Thank you. There's not a clear answer because it depends on the specific site characteristics. There's policies within the efficient community plan, specifically uplands policies, that specify the siting of new development should be done in a way to protect existing mature on-site trees. In some instances, there's not a lot of room given the required setbacks to site a home in alternate locations that would allow for the protection of trees on site. In this particular instance, it is quite a large property. It's quite deep. So potentially, if a new application did come in, staff could look at potential siting options that may result in the preservation of those trees.
Thank you. Yeah, it's difficult because I mean, there's such a large amount of trees on that property. As we heard, 76% of tree canopy is there, and to reduce it to 71 doesn't seem like a lot, but to lose 2 mature trees does seem like a lot. So it's a bit of a quandary.
Councillor Braithwaite, any other questions of the applicants before I go ahead, Councillor Zelka?
Thank you very much. I do note that there is an easement in favor of Oak Bay with respect to the uplands combined sewer separation aspects, and that it is right near this area in the hazardous area. I just wanted to ask whether through the staff whether our easement and our sewer sewage water outfall that outfalls into Cadborough Bay, whether there's any risk to that infrastructure with respect to removing any of the trees in that area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Mr. Weber, does the removal of these 2 trees or not have any impact on our sewage infrastructure?
Thank you, Worship. That certainly wasn't flagged by our district arborist, of course, and it wasn't identified by district engineering when we referred the application to them. I'm aware Dan Horan, the director of engineering, is in attendance tonight. I'm not sure if he might be able to add anything further to that. But based on my understanding of the facts that I know, the proposed removal of those trees would not impact that sanitary sewer line.
And I do apologize, if I may, Chair, that I just noticed it now. I should have flagged it earlier, that there is a right-of-way that goes through that area as well. Thank you. If there's any way to get further information about this, either now or at a later date, I would very much appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Your Worship. Part of this application was a discussion with engineering about the servicing. The current storm sewer that runs through that right-of-way is to be disconnected, and we're to provide, as part of the work to the house, servicing out to Beach Drive for the existing sanitary and the future storm drain that is to be installed on Beach Drive, thus taking the connections completely away from the area at the rear.
Thank you for that clarification. I don't know if Mr. Horan has anything to add to that, but I think we can trust that that will be dealt with as part of the overall building permit process. Councillor Zelka, anything else? Councillor Ney, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to staff. I think staff has probably already addressed this, but I'd just like to get the final analysis just really succinctly to Mr. Weber. Could you please just comment on the staff, the staff perspective on, are those 2 trees that would be replaced where the patio to be, where the plans currently show it to be, are they putting the building or any people at risk in your view?
I think we've already sort of established that we're not going to talk to legal risk or anything at this point on those 2 trees, Councillor Ney.
So, okay, so can I ask it in a different way, Mr. Wright? So, is there any so not risk, but are they in a position where they're, rooted in a way that they're not likely to fall down in a wind coming from the offshore?
Thank you, Councillor Ney.
I could just have a comment on the viability, the health, the rootedness of those trees. and not risk, but just that they could just comment on the, you know, the resilience of those trees to withstand storms.
Ms. Rell, I'll let you jump in here on this one.
Thank you, Your Worship. The staff report does note that the park staff do not support the removal of these oaks, which display good vitality through their twig bud development and canopy density for a landscape feature that may be able to be located elsewhere in the rear yard. So I will just offer council that if they choose to refer this application, if they feel they need more information from the arborist on staff, Your Worship, they could always refer this application to a future meeting and ask the arborist to attend, just as another information piece.
Sure. Thank you. But with the report we have in front of us is that the trees are healthy. And they're not at any risk of falling down from any obvious signs at this point, essentially, is what that boils down to. Councillor Name?
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands popping up on this one. I think this ultimately boils down to, I don't really have any questions at this point. I think the questions I've had have all been answered. Anything else, Mr. Banks, in terms of response to any questions you've heard that you think haven't been clearly answered?
I think not. I could have commented that the distance from the shoreline to the top of the bank is about 22 to 24 meters. The distance to the two trees in question is about 40 or 43 meters. So they're in no way likely to contribute to instability of the bank.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. With a name like yours, I'm sure you have expertise. Go ahead to Councillor Braithwaite.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we can go a couple of different ways here, but I mean, if we need more information on like assessment of risk mitigation, or if we want to get an opinion from an arborist, I mean, I guess we could do that, but I think there's probably enough information in front of us to make a decision tonight. Yeah, unless someone has another comment on that.
I think it's appropriate to get to a motion, and we can just debate a motion. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, and I've appreciated all the comments. I would like to move option 1, which is the option most appropriate, I think, for this application. And then I would like to make a comment. Thank you.
Motion option number 1 is essentially approving subject to the protection of the trees and the remediation for the geotechnical.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Green. You have the floor.
Yes, thank you. And I won't take too much time. I think we do have complete information before us. I do think the arborist report is quite informative. And I also know that it is impossible to determine how and when a tree might come down. I live with a very large municipal tree in my front yard, and we often worry about it, but I've had visits from the arborist staff for Oak Bay, and at the moment the tree is healthy, and it's almost impossible to determine when or if that tree will come down. So I think it's a very difficult question. I appreciate the owner's concerns, but I think in this case to take down mature trees that are protected in Oak Bay at this point in time is probably not, from my perspective, the wisest decision. We've talked a lot about climate change and the importance of trees and tree canopy, and so I think we should honor that. And just a quick comment on the comment around the advisory design panel and their decision not to include this item in their recommendation. That is absolutely appropriate because it is outside their mandate. So thank you very much, and I've appreciated Mr. Banks and the owner being here tonight. Thank you. And also Mr. Weber's comments.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Appleton, you seconded. I'll go to you, and then Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you, Worship, and just concur with Councillor Green's comments. Council has heard me comment, or provide my opinion in the past on similar situations that we are blessed with a number of trees in close proximity to structures in the district. Most properties, in fact, have them. All trees, in my view, exist on a spectrum of potential risk. Every tree has potential issues that could arise with it. There is, again, as Councillor Green has said, no way to completely predict how a tree may behave under certain circumstances, but I feel that authorizing the removal of what district staff have clearly indicated as being healthy trees, especially oak trees in this circumstance, would set a pretty poor precedent, especially where redesign is possible. And I value Councillor Braithwaite's comments about what a new build would look like. In this particular case, there is not an excessive constraint in order to achieve a redesign. I think this is the appropriate way forward, and I do appreciate staff flagging the retention of the trees as being important to achieve Upland's guidelines, and recommending these changes, recommending these amendments or conditions to approval as part of the staff report. So thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Upland. Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, I would concur with both my councillor colleagues' comments. I have two questions. Number one, if this moves forward as proposed, it doesn't stop the proponent from actually going ahead and building this deck. They would just build it within the proximity of those two trees, so that they would be able to still build it as planned.
Mr. Weber, I think just maybe some clarification. The plans would have to be modified to accommodate, as I understand. Is that? Yeah.
The
Banks,
patio area would have to be modified, as we understand it from the arborist.
All right, thank you.
And then my other comment kind of goes to something that Councillor Appleton was saying. I have a family member who had 3 large oak trees in their front yard that thrived for many, many years, and they just were very diligent about having arborists come and look at them. And when there became an issue with the trees, before anything actually happened, they were then able to take them down, because the arborist basically said, yes, it's time that they came down. So I think that to me would make sense in this area as well, that an arborist would just take a good look at these trees over the years, and then they would be able to tell us when, or tell the owner when they might look like they might begin to fail or something like that. So I think it's well within what we want to see to keep these trees here, and so I'm going to be supporting the motion.
Thank you. Is any other? I have Councillor Ney and then Zelka.
Actually, I didn't have anything to add, but I think I appreciate the comments that are being made by my colleagues, and I concur with them, so I'll be moving in favor of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Chair, and I thank Councillor Green for moving option 1. I'll be voting in favor. This is a challenging property, and thank goodness it's such a large property in the uplands, being in the hazardous development area. Obviously, you were aware of that before you purchased it, so you know that there are some slope concerns in this area in Oak Bay in general. So I very much appreciate your being willing to remove those rocks and do whatever needs to be done to support the stability and the slope concern. And of course, in the end, you're saving your own house as well. And so thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Just always remind us that we should refer comments through the chair as much as possible to make sure that I can direct those. Thank you for those comments. I will make the observation of this, that the ask of the 2 trees, to my mind, it's not completely unreasonable. I certainly see the reason for the ask. The house is it's a very large house, but it's small relative to what's possible to being built there. If they change the design of the house to cover those 2 trees, they would come out automatically, almost automatically, not entirely. And so I think there is some consideration there that should be given to these kinds of asks. I do think, though, this is, I think, as the other people have noted, the 2 trees at this point are healthy and should be able to be accommodated, and so I think that the motion as it's laid forward is reasonable. I just don't want people to think that there are absolutely no reason that you can't take out trees if the ask is made and is reasonable, because there are times when it does make sense, and certainly planting 4 new is always is needed as well, because many of our oak trees are of a similar age, and we need to get some diversity in there as well. So thank you. Those are my comments. Are there any other comments before I call the question? Don't see any, so I'll call the. Any opposed? Carries. Thank you, Mr. Banks. Thank you, Mr. Akaban, for your time tonight. Much appreciate the work done. And I just wanted to comment, Mr. Banks, as this is a modification of an existing building. It's a beautiful adaptation of the building in terms of the design and the sympathy to the original design and the modernization. It's an exceptional example of a modified building, a modified existing building. So thank you for doing that work. All right. Thank you. Have a good evening. With that, we are moving on to item number 9.2, which is a siting and design for 640 Beach Drive. And Mr. Weber, I'll ask you to introduce this item again as well.
Yes, thanks again, Your Worship. The District of Oak Bay is in receipt of a siting design application for the construction of a new single-family home on the property located at 640 Beach Drive. The property is located on the north side of Beach Drive between Transit Road and Newport Avenue. It is approximately 973 meters squared in area, surrounded by single-family homes on all sides, and has an RS4 zoning designation and established neighborhoods OCP designation. The property is presently a vacant lot resulting from a 2018 heritage or revitalization agreement and subdivision that created 3 new properties surrounding a heritage home located at 644 Beach Drive. The subject property is the last of 3 properties to be developed, and council approval of the siting and architectural design and exterior finish of the proposed 2-story home is required as per a covenant registered on title during the subdivision. No bylaw protected trees are proposed to be removed as part of the development, and the applicant is proposing to plant 10 new trees, which increase existing canopy cover from 16% to 53%, exceeding the 35% canopy coverage target required for the zone. Staff reviewed the proposal and found it to conform with district bylaws as well as policies within the official committee plan. Staff considered the proposal to be supportable and ready for council consideration. The application was further reviewed at the March 1st, 2022 Advisory Design Panel meeting, and the panel noted that they liked the building, its relationship to neighboring homes, and the consideration of the surrounding natural and built environment, and recommended that council consider the approval of the proposal as presented. Staff are requesting council direction on this application, and the applicant, Patrick Warren, along with myself, are available to answer questions should council have any. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weber, and welcome, Mr. Warren. I'll go to council first for questions. Are there any questions of council to the applicant or his staff? Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I'm just, I was just looking at the arborist report. And in the report, it says that the arborist did not see any retaining walls in the planned garden areas. And so I'm wondering if there is more information that has been provided to indicate whether the plantings that are provided on the plan are actually supported by more soil and that are held by retaining walls.
Sure. I'm happy to go to Mr. Warren on this one in terms of, he probably has more details on the on that level. Mr. Warren?
Thank you. Thanks for your question. So I just want to repeat your question back. The audio is pretty good, but it's not perfect. So my understanding with your question is that you're asking if the grading change between the existing and the proposed grading will support the retention of the trees that the arborist is recommending retaining. Is that the question?
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Mr.
Yes.
Warren.
Yeah, thank you. So there's space between the home and the trees to regrade and using soft landscaping. So basically without the use of walls, but there are walls shown, and I'm just going to, sorry, I have to refer back to my plans. There are walls shown just at the back of the driveway where there's a change in grade, and they are probably not showing up because the driveway itself kind of has the, sorry, I'm going to actually just go over to my drawing here.
The best place to look at the elevations, Mr. Warren?
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, for sure. Shall I screen share then?
No, it's fine. If you could just point us, just let us know which thing you're looking at. We'll look at it in our agenda packages.
Okay, great. So yeah, the elevations are taken pretty close to the building, but you can see on the north elevation, you can see a wall shown at the back edge of the driveway on the left-hand side there. That's on the northeast corner. And that's where there actually is a retaining wall there, changing grade between the driveway elevation and the existing grade. And then you can see there's a dashed line underneath the thicker kind of proposed grade line, and that's the existing grade. So the thicker grade line actually just falls down towards those trees, but there's ample room for that to happen without risk to the trees.
I'm not sure we all got that picture, but I think the answer is pretty clear anyway. Councillor Patterson.
Oh, okay.
Else?
Thank you.
Is it easier if I screen share then?
I think it's fine at this point. We're getting to the meat of the setting and design after all, not to all the details. I think unless there's an ask for that, we'll move on. Any other questions, Councillor Braithwaite?
Just, I can't remember whether I saw anything in the report about blasting, and I'm wondering if there's any blasting on this site.
Mr. Weber?
Thank you, Worship. Yes, I'm uncertain if there is to be blasting. I imagine there would be. It is an extremely rocky site, essentially just a rocky outcrop. Perhaps the applicant might be able to provide some additional information on that.
Yeah, Mr.
Sure, I'm happy to. There will be a small amount of rock removal, and I hesitate to say blasting because it is not very much. And so I know that we haven't had a conversation with the blasting contractor. At times, they can do that with an excavator, just basically using the front of the excavator to chip off the top of the rock. And other times, they'll need to put in a kind of expanding grout. So they'll drill into the rock and then put the expanding grout in, and that cracks the rock so that they can remove it. I don't expect extensive blasting, so I don't think that what most people think of as being blasting with the charges and the tarps and things like that, we don't expect that to be required here.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Go ahead, Councillor Green.
If council is agreeable, I would be prepared to make a motion.
Motions are always in order, so if you wish to make a motion, go ahead.
I will move option 1 to approve the siting and design of this application, or the application.
I'm just going to roll the motion to receive into that motion as well, if that's
And
okay.
to receive.
Perfect, thank you. Moved and seconded. Is there further discussion on the siting and design?
I just have
sorry,
a
go
comment.
ahead, Councillor
No,
Green.
that's fine, thank you. And thank you very much for the report, and also to the applicant for being with us tonight. And I would hope very much, as you've described, rock removal on the lot, I hope very much it is what you actually described, which is expansion or a heavy-duty equipment piece that would take the rock out rather by cracking and breaking it rather than blasting. That would be hugely desirable. So perhaps you could, if you would communicate that to the owner, that would be appreciated. Just that we would prefer to see a natural removal as opposed to extensive blasting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I think your comments are related to the disturbance of neighbors more than anything. Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you, Mayor. And I just, looking at the information about this, I see that the lot coverage, obviously that's permitted as 0.3, you're doing 0.19, so that's good. You're not covering all of as much as you could. But I do notice that the FAR is 0.4 and you're using 0.4, and that always worries me when I see an application like this for a brand new house, because it might be fine for the people that are moving into the house now, but 10 years from now or 5 years from now when the house is sold and someone wants to do a mild, a small renovation, they have absolutely no way to do anything to that. So it's always interesting to me when I see applications that come to the maximum of the FAR, and I wish that sometimes it would be a little bit left over, but it is a beautiful design.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Chair. And I have some concerns about a 0.4 FAR, but on the other hand, you haven't exceeded that. So as a greenfield sort of situation, I applaud not going over the FAR and doing it within. A question, I guess, vaguely related to siting and design. This is within a bare land strata, if I remember correctly. How is this going to be serviced in terms of water and sewage? And with all the rock, I'm just, if you don't mind my asking with respect to that, and if there are any concerns about siting with respect to surfacing.
I'm just going to give that to Mr. Weber. Perhaps it's just as simple as to ask if those things have been considered as part of the approval process.
Yes, thank you. So my understanding is during the original subdivision, a servicing plan was approved by the district and services are already in place going up to the property line for the development. The applicant might be able to provide some additional information on that.
Again, we haven't kind of met with the the general contractor to go through that, but normally it would come up likely under the driveway and then into the house. And there is going to be fill actually in the driveway to bring the driveway up to grade. So it would likely be a mix of within fill areas, and there may be some small amounts of rock removal in areas where that's required. But again, with the siting and the fall of the rock, there are actually some sort of natural areas. I don't expect that to be an issue at all.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Chair, for the opportunity to ask a bit of an unusual question. But being so rocky, it's always I guess a consideration as whether that's going to be a problem with respect to where we place this the footprint. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I don't see any other discussion or hands up on this one. So I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. It is a very lovely design, Mr. Warren, and good luck with the project. Moving on to item number 10, section number 10. Section 10 does allow for public input, and so we're going to move to 10 point, just really one item in this section related to 1561 York Place. We have Ms. East here with us to provide an overview of this. This is a heritage alteration permit. I understand we have Mr. Holland here as I think, and Mr. Luxton, I believe, are both here from the applicant to address questions as they get raised. But before we get to that, we'll go to Ms. East. As far as public, this is open to public input. What we'll do is we'll have the presentation from staff. We'll have a chance for council to ask questions, and then following the questions of council, I'm going to try and keep it to questions more than comments. We'll go to members of the public. Anybody who wishes to address us is welcome to do so, either online or in person. I think there's a couple of people, at least in person, that wish to address council. And then we'll come back once the public has had a chance to speak. There may be some additional questions that come from council, at which point we'll seek a motion and have some debate on that motion. So without further ado, it's 8 o'clock, so we have nominally under our procedures bylaw at least 1 hour to deal with this issue, so we'll try and stay within that time frame. Ms. East, welcome.
Thank you, Worship. I will give you a very brief summary. I will not repeat, the entire presentation, of course, was delivered to Council on February 14th, and so I won't repeat that presentation now, but what I will do is give you a summary of what has happened since February 14th. So we left the February 14th council meeting with direction from council to meet with the applicant and also for the Heritage Commission to meet to discuss the appropriateness of the proposed rehabilitation of the heritage rock wall, the width of the 3 openings that are proposed, and also the design of the gates. So we did proceed with that. We met with both the applicant and the Heritage Commission, and the applicant, the difference in the what's in front of you right now is the applicant has proposed reduced wall openings, and that reduction is from, there's 2 wall openings, one on York and one on Prospect that were originally proposed at 16 feet to accommodate a combination pedestrian vehicular opening. They are now proposing that be a 14-foot opening in the wall. And there's also a smaller pedestrian opening that was originally proposed at 6 feet and now is proposed at 5 feet. And that's also on Prospect, further south on the site. So that the other thing that has also changed is the original gate design was a modern design using Corten steel, which was a weathered steel product. And the applicant has brought forward a new gate design after meeting with the Heritage Commission on February 15th. And the new gate design now incorporates steel spindles rather than Corten steel to be somewhat more reminiscent of the original wrought iron gates that are around the neighborhood, but also reflect the modern nature of the house being built. So that is the report. That is the report in front of you. Is just bringing forward those changes with some options for council. And I think the applicant and his agents are here with perhaps a presentation with more detail of their revised proposal. And I certainly will be more than pleased to answer any questions arising.
Thank you very much, Ms. East, for that comprehensive but compact introduction. Welcome Mr. Miller, Mr. Holland in the room, and I believe Mr. Luxton is available online. Is that correct? Very good. Yeah, so you've got a little bit of a presentation of what the changes are, as I understand. We have that in our package. Is there a mechanism to put it up on the screen in here as well? Okay, so we'll do that. And I'm not sure who I should introduce here. Mr. Holland, you've got the microphone in front of you, so I'm happy to turn this over to you to do a brief overview of the changes that have come about, and I'm sure there'll be a few questions as well attached, so welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship. Council, it's a real pleasure to be here this evening to speak to you in person. It's a new day. It's very nice. It's excellent. Thank you for the time. I'll just move through a few slides here. We've got a few dozen slides just to review the history of the process and where we're at. This has been coming and going through council's chambers for a good number of months, and so we'll move through this, but just needed to bring it all together. So next slide, please. Is there a...
Yeah, so you've...
Excellent, great, thank you. So just a couple of thoughts on context. Review the gate design, as the planner, Jocelyn East, mentioned. Just talk a little bit about the issues of precedent in the discussion. Don Luxton is here to review the applicable policies, as there's an interesting discussion around policy with the Heritage Commission, and then finally draw to a conclusion. Next slide, please. So in terms of the application context, we have a building permit here in front of us and for the new home that's underway. We have an HAP application in front of us as well to reconstruct, rehabilitate the walls and install some new gates. Next slide, please. A few thoughts on the decision context here. These are the four things I'd like to just focus on here. One is on the design of gates, one is on the reality of precedent, heritage policy, and the legal dimension. Next slide, please. Three things I'd like to cover on the gates. The first one is the original gates, as they're being referred to extensively in this discussion. The next one will be in the first gate design you saw last year, and then finally the updated gate design. Next slide, please. The original gates are twofold in discussion. The first one is the carriage/vehicle gate, which was originally installed upon York Place. And the other one is the pedestrian gate, which was down on Prospect Place. The gates were not designed exactly as the same. Obviously, they were in different contexts. Both gates are now not there, and we... for a number of reasons. So the ones on York Place were aged, falling down. They were too small for the required opening for functionality. They don't meet the building code's requirements for height, for safety, given that the new home has a pool. And so modern functionality began to open this discussion to a wider gate, and obviously then the old ones don't fit. On Prospect, the approved design includes a driveway where the previous pedestrian gate was, so it no longer fits that context. And none of them are available at the moment for being able to be, they're past their ability to be repaired and reused. Next slide, please. The initial design, as you know, Council's approved building permit for the home is probably one of the finest contemporary modern homes in the region right now. It's a excellence in design in that regard. And so the gate design, we'll be talking about this a little bit more, that was brought forward was an interesting combination of a more historical spindle and rail gate and the Corten steel diagonal bracing, which your planner spoke about earlier. Next slide, please. Council and the Commission reviewed this and both expressed concerns regarding this. The Commission noted that the size of the opening was of concern. It was 16 feet at the time. The materiality was understandable as a heritage component, but not in keeping with what they understand the history would be as a preference. And the design of the gate they felt was maybe too modern for the heritage character of the area. And Council had some further questions and referred it back to the Commission. Next slide, please. So following the results of the review of the Commission's concerns and some that Council had noted, the applicant has completely redesigned the gates and brought forward something that is much more muted in its expression. I would say much more sympathetic with the historical design of the gates in the past, and also certainly the modern current interpretations of the heritage character. It's quite a simple and elegant form that is a really simple rail and spindle design with a diagonal piece that's of very similar character to the rails and spindles, very elegant in its nature. Next slide, please. The applicant also reduced the width as much as possible, still be able to handle modern functionality of things like delivery vehicles, but quite a significant reduction right to the very minimum possible. So this is the new design for both York and for Prospect. They're essentially identical gates. The one you see here is the York Street one with the restored Annandale Corner gate posts. So it's, like I mentioned, a classic spindle and picket design. The diagonals weren't put in straight in the way they were in the previous design. They've been a much more feminine expression here of a curve that reflects some of the clean geometry in the new home, but also, you know, showing some respect to the historical gates of the area that also included curves as well. Next slide, please. The widths have been narrowed to 14 feet for the two main ones, and the pedestrian gate remains at the same width. So you can see how they will fit in there. You can see the operational sort of sense of this. The idea is that the gate services both a pedestrian access and a vehicular access. And the idea in doing this is we get to minimize the breaks in the wall by putting them together, and we minimize the width by putting them together. So rather than having a separate 3 to 4 foot wide pedestrian gate, as many homes in the HCA have, this one has been brought together to both double function as a vehicular access. And that allows us to get the vehicular access size of the gate down to what largely would be considered, and I'll show you some precedents here shortly, as essentially the narrowest driveways anywhere in the HCA. So by combining these two, the architect has been able to narrow them down, and with this new design, which is a symmetrical design, it brings forward a really nice bridge between contemporary and heritage, and really respects the heritage character of the area as you walk by. Next slide, please. Just one consideration on the question of width and why it became an issue. Historically, obviously, these gates were designed in an era, this was the turn of the century, a century ago. The uses of this gates originally would have been horses and carriages, followed by the very first vehicles in Oak Bay, which would have been in the ilk of a Model T or a Model A and the other similar constructed vehicles at the time. A Model A, for reference, is about 67 inches wide, or roughly 1.7 meters. It's very narrow. Today's typical delivery truck that would be bringing a cube van of something like that, that would be bringing something you might order off Amazon, is typically 2.6 meters wide. So there's a very significant width difference. More importantly is the length of the wheelbase. Carriages are very agile in their turning circles, as were the early vehicles. A 30-foot wheelbase for an emergency vehicle or a 6-ton delivery truck has a much, much wider turning circle. And so the result is that many of them will be very hard-pressed to get through the gate at a full 90-degree angle, and this means that the arc then requires the gate to be just slightly wider than the narrowest you could possibly fit. And I have an example of further up York Street for the width of even when you directly drive through. Next slide, please. So the next dimension that I wanted to talk about is precedent here, and I'll start by talking primarily about the gates and the widths in the HCA that form the precedent for the discussions of the application of the HCA policy. Next slide, please. I have 3 slides here. I spent a couple of hours with my measuring tape, and I walked up and down the streets and walked over to the edges of the property lines and laid down my measuring tape. Not trespassing on anybody's property, but just wanted to see how wide all these different areas were. It's an interesting range, actually. It ranges, the widths of the driveways, if you will, range from 0. So 1925 and 1935 Prospect have, 1325 and 1335 have no driveways. So they just have they basically park on the public rights of way or some of their own private land in front of their places. The majority of all the rest start around 9 feet wide. So here in the lower left, we have 1538 Beach Drive, and its driveway at the property line is about 9 feet wide. So if you squeeze your vehicle in there, it's like an average to small parking stall in, say, a shopping mall. So you can open your doors, you can get out, but if you tried to open both doors wide, you would be hitting whatever on the sides. There's many gates that generally fall between 10 and 12 feet. So that's a very common range in the area for the vehicular access. So here's just a few, including 3 of them that are on York Place, directly across from this site. The more common one, the most current one down on the bottom, is a little over 11 feet wide. Next slide, please. We have quite a few larger driveways in the HCA as well. Beach Drive, 1558 Beach Drive, which is directly across Prospect from this site, has 2 entries, one on Beach and one on Prospect. Both are 13 feet. On Prospect, that building also has a 16-foot wide access to a garage, plus a 10.5-foot driveway into the side of the house, leaving an opening through the walls of almost 40 feet for that home to access its various aspects. Right up and down, right next to it, immediately adjacent, very strong steel walls at 1550? 1580 Beach, 12 feet wide, Prospect 13 feet wide, just next to the site. Back up to York Street, they continue to get larger. The one on the right there, 11.5 feet almost for just the vehicle access, and another 4-foot gate for pedestrians. And finally, next slide, please. At the end of York, in the larger redevelopment of that heritage home with the infill buildings that went around them a few decades ago, that's almost 15.5 feet wide for just the vehicles, and there's an additional 3-foot wide pedestrian gate, leaving us over 18 feet worth of openings for the functionality of that area. Next slide, please. So just a few perspectives. This site, with its proposed new reduced width of 14 feet, and that includes both pedestrian and vehicle access, is attempting to essentially bring both in at very narrow, the driveway component of it as narrow as the narrowest driveways, with the pedestrian access integrated into it to allow for the turning circles. It falls roughly in the middle, somewhere on the continuum between the largest and the narrowest because of that. And as such, it's of an appropriate width for the area. Next slide, please. Regarding precedent in the future, a few thoughts on this one. The decisions that we're making today at the very beginning of basically the implementation of your HCA are setting precedents for all other landowners. We know this landowner well from the historical work that he's done and working with the community and council on a number of projects. The HCA includes many other landowners, and the precedents being set here around how gates and walls are addressed will affect all of the rest of them as well. And so there's sort of a forward-looking impetus here in how we go about this, and how council responds to these is beginning to set the messaging to the community and to the landowners around how options might be looked at from the other landowners. Next slide, please. We have an additional challenge here, is that the HCA was selected as an HCA because of all of the beautiful old buildings that are in it, and the challenge with that is there's a lot of beautiful old buildings in it, and they're going to need significant upgrades that are very expensive, and there will be concurrently then new homes probably required, and certainly extensive construction required in these areas. And as such, the precedent of looking ahead to the integration of modern homes, heritage homes, modern gates, modern walls, heritage gates, heritage walls. This is the very beginning of the future implementation of the intent of the HCA and all of the complexities that come with making those choices between the different kinds of guidelines. Next slide, please. I'm going to hand it to Don Luxton in just a moment, but just a few thoughts before I do on this third dimension of the policy context for heritage. There are 3 dimensions of policy that apply here. The first, obviously, is your official community plan. It has a great section on heritage, a very strong commitment to preserving it. The next layer is the unique one to this particular area, the Prospect Heritage Conservation Area. And then we have sort of a superseding or an enveloping umbrella one, which are the national standards and guidelines for the preservation of historic locations and historic sites across the country. These are interpreted through yourselves and your staff, but also through the Heritage Commission. So they bring forward their interpretations of these, and this is where we go next. Next slide, please. We met with the Heritage Commission a couple of weeks ago to bring the new designs forward. The meeting was relatively short. There were a few comments about it and a few questions around widths and a few things like that. There was a motion that had been previously prepared for this, and the new designs didn't change that motion, so it moved through really quickly. We didn't get the chance to have much of a discussion about it, and so following the motion which is before you from the Heritage Commission, which was roughly to have any new gates be largely a replication of the old ones, albeit different materials since the old ones are no longer with us, different materials, different widths, different interpretations. We had a discussion, Luxton and myself, in trying to fully understand what their decision was based on. As they quoted there's a couple of things that I just wanted to raise this. The decision around the gate design by the commission to make the recommendation to you referenced guidelines and policies that apply to architectural character, to architectural items which have been damaged and need to be restored. So this is be understandable, let's say, well, it could be a gate, it could be a stained glass window, it could be something that has been damaged and it can be reused in its original format and needs to be restored. And it was from that basis that they suggested, they quoted that guideline as their rationale for recommending to you that any new gates must look basically like the old gates as much as possible. This raised a couple of questions in our minds. The reference that they gave was an example of Government House in Victoria. And in the minutes in the discussion, if you watched it, they said, like, if, let's say, an accident happened to one of the gates at Government House, we would expect that gate to be repaired and restored with its original materials so as to basically seem the accident had never happened, no damage had occurred. Which is, I think, all of us would appreciate that. All of us would completely agree with that. If someone drove their vehicle into one of the gates at Government House, those beautiful gates, we would all agree that that's exactly the right thing to occur. The confusion that happened with us, and we weren't able to have the discussion with them because of the meeting was closed, was how that applied to this site. So there were a few questions in our minds. First off, that is Victoria, this is Oak Bay. They have two very different heritage regimes. The second point was, is it a landscape feature or is it a building feature? It was an architectural feature that was raised as per the architectural repair policy, but the gates are part of the landscape. And there's been an argument that said the gates should be seen as part of the walls and not the house, because we have a new modern house. At the arts and crafts era, when these were put together, gates, homes, and gardens and walls were all seen as an integrated whole. This is one of the famous design principles of Sir Edward Lutyens and Gertrude Jekyll at this time in Britain when everyone was coming here and these homes were being developed. That was the arts and crafts, architecture, and garden integration. So the original gates, the Annandale House, and the walls, and the gardens would have all been conceived of as a coherent whole. As we have it now, we have a contemporary home, we have historical gates, or historical walls, and now we have this integration between the gates and the home and the wall in question. The other question had to do with the repair of gates as an example, and that we found a little confusing with respect to the fact that these will be completely new gates, they will be completely new construction, they will be a different size and a different width, and in the case of Prospect, they never existed there. So it'll be a completely new fabricated process. And this raised some questions in our mind which we weren't able to have answered by the Heritage Commission in regard to this. So while we understand the application of the ideas to Government House and its gates, if they needed to be repaired, we are not clear as to why those were the recommendations and that was the rationale for you to consider tonight for this particular site. I think the final observation on that one was that Government House is got to be considered one of the most important social, cultural, historical heritage sites in the city. I think we would rank that up probably with its grounds next to the Parliament buildings, the Empress, and many others from this era. It also would be seen as a class of the seat of government, as the person who lives there is the representative of Her Majesty the Queen of England and has been so since the beginning When you're asked to compare that to the current building, this current building is a single-family home of a family that, I haven't asked the landowner whether he's any relation to the Queen of England, but I don't believe that there's any social historical reference there that would make this important. And so we remain mystified as to why those were the examples that were offered by the commission. But we were unable to have that debate and discussion with them. So moving forward then, I'm going to hand the microphone, if it so please you, to Donald Luxton online, and he has a dozen or so slides to return to the original heritage policy that drove this discussion.
Thank you very much, and welcome to the meeting, Mr. Luxton.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I hope to clarify some of the discussion that's been occurring on this issue with respect to the comments of the Heritage Commission, and in understanding that we all want to achieve good conservation here. So what I wanted to do is take a step back, because there appears to be a lot of confusion between what the Prospect HCA guidelines say and what the national standards and guidelines say. And they really are congruent. There's not this kind of misfit between these two sets of guidelines, and you don't pick one over the other. So if you go to the introduction to the Prospect HCA guidelines, it says that the guidelines are based on three primary documents. The Local Government Act, obviously, because of the enabling legislation and the heritage policies that accrue from that enabling legislation to Oak Bay. The Prospect Heritage Conservation Area Statement of Significance, which states the values that are intended to be conserved, and the standards and guidelines for the conservation of historic places in Canada, which is the national standards and guidelines we use as conservation best practice across the country. So they're not oppositional. So if the Prospect Heritage Conservation Area provides a definition of heritage value, and it does talk about certain specific things and character defining elements. However, if you look at the wording of the Prospect HCA, it talks about landscape details being integral to the character of the place, and we would all agree with that. Streets and lanes of a rural character and natural features, and minimal access points for most properties with roadways. Those are the character defining features that are listed in the Statement of Significance. Next slide, please. So there are also guidelines within the Prospect HCA that talk about recommendations for visual relationships about historic walls, gates, and formal entrances. Guidelines for landscaping materials not to use things like aluminum. Guidelines for landscape design, such as retention, reinstatement, or repair of historic features, and not to remove or relocate historic features such as gates, stone walls, house numbers, statuary, etc. What this application is trying to do is actually conserve the heritage value of the rock walls. Overall, the intent has always been to preserve the heritage rock walls, but with several rehabilitation measures to ensure functionality, and in this case also safety. Next slide, please. So there is in the national standards and guidelines, and again, when we come to actually intervene into a historic context, we need to go beyond what the Prospect HCA says and go to the national standards and guidelines for best practice. Like, how do we achieve this conservation of this historic site? So it says right in the standards and guidelines that you must be mindful of overall heritage value, using documented character defining elements as a starting point and guide. This is conceptual and practical framework for how intervention should be carried out. And I will say that what we're doing with rock wall is absolutely no different than what we do with many heritage buildings, which is we will sometimes change things to make them more functional. Next slide, please. So what we did with this process when we started in a number of years ago, 2018, I believe, we wrote a statement of significance for the rock walls. And we want that statement of significance to actually work with the standards and guidelines. Next slide, please. And so what's really critical to understand is that we did not include the gates in the statement of significance at that point because they were not viable. They had already deteriorated beyond the point of repair. So we did describe all the other historic features of the rock walls, including the gate posts, etc. Next slide, please. And when we are making a decision about an intervention to a historic site, the standards and guidelines define a process, and they define a very clear process of understanding, planning, and intervening, which lead us through how to make appropriate decisions. Next slide, please. The understanding is that we don't want to do anything until we really do know the site, until we understand the heritage value, we determine what's important about it, its character defining elements, and we investigate and document conditions and changes to that situation. Next slide, please. Then when we move into planning for the conservation, we maintain or select an appropriate and sustainable use, which in this case, we need gates to make this function. But you will notice the second point is identify project requirements. And this is, if we were, for example, looking at a building, this is where we would look at things like building code requirements, structural stability, function, etc. Just like you were asking about where is the servicing on the house at 640 Beach, we have to ask all those questions about function and safety and all those things as well. Then we determine the primary treatment, which is whether or not it's preservation, rehabilitation, or restoration. We review the standards and we follow what the guidelines say. This is how we achieve best practice. Next slide, please. And then we actually do the work and carry out regular maintenance to make sure that the historic site is conserved on an ongoing basis. Next slide, please. So where this discussion really got kind of mixed up was around this issue of should we restore, should we replicate, what do we do with these gates, et cetera, et cetera. Well, first of all, we have to understand that we cannot just put the gates back, even if they were repairable or even if we copied them exactly. We have different functional requirements that mean we'd have to change them anyway. So as we begin to move forward in determining the functional requirements, we realize that we are designing new gates. If we're designing new gates, we don't go back and sort of replicate old gates, because the problem is with that is we would have to distort that original design beyond what is appropriate. So when we have a functional rehabilitation, as we see this is as we're planning for the future, not the past, we have to think about how functionally we're going to make this all work. And that includes a number of technical issues, as has been discussed. Next slide, please. So in 2019, we issued a conservation plan for the rock walls, which had this kind of thinking embedded in it right from day one at the beginning of the discussion, that the rock walls need to be conserved, and substantially they are going to be conserved. And so that's a lot of work that needs to be undertaken to do that. There's repointing, structural stabilization, getting proper drainage in so they don't fail over time. They're kind of moving around a bit. There's chunks that have fallen out. There's work that needs to be done. So there will be work done on the rock walls for sure, and that has always been the intention. This conservation strategy for the entire set of walls and gates contains aspects of what we call preservation, rehabilitation, and restoration, all as part of the conservation. In addition to not being wide enough, the gates were determined to be beyond repair. So this means they're new gates. So we're trying to be honest about them being new gates, not fake old gates, and that would not meet our standards and guidelines. And we actually continued to look at this through 2020, that we were going to deal with the interventions to the crossing points as rehabilitation measures for functional reasons. Next slide, please. For rehabilitation interventions, and if we are going to change things functionally, the appropriate standards that relate to rehabilitation are standard 11 and 12, most importantly standard 11, which we use all the time for additions or changes to historic sites, that any related new construction should be physical and visually compatible, subordinate to and distinguishable from the historic place. So in other words, it's telling us not to fake it, that we want to actually have something that is contemporary but also sympathetic. The rehabilitated crossing points, which need to be wider and meet functional requirements, are designed to comply with standard 11 and also standard 12. Next slide, please. So overall, the conservation strategy had to take into account, first of all, BC Building Code. There is a swimming pool on the site. The gates can't be climbable. They're at the minimum height they can be to meet this requirement, and that's an essential part of the new design. We are indeed doing exactly what the Prospect HCA asks us to do, which is conserve the rock walls. The rock walls are being preserved and restored, and that's a large amount of work that needs to be undertaken to conserve those walls, but the crossing points need to be rehabilitated. Next slide, please. Because there is a difference to the approach to the rock walls and the gates, we also want to recognize that best practice is standard 4. Recognize each historic place as a physical record of its time, place, and use. Do not create a sense of false historical development. So if we tried to replicate the gates exactly, which we can't, we would be faking it. So we don't see that as good heritage conservation practice. Next slide. And I'll turn it back over to Mr. Holland at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Donald, for that. Just to close here, all of the work that we take into account here, we understand is happening. I think really the whole purpose here so far, as I speak to my students in our planning classes, that, you know, we need to stay out of the legal realm as much as possible, because when we get there, it means all of our discussions have been unsuccessful. So I think really we'll move on from this slide to the next slide, and I believe that there's a common ground here. I think that the goals that we all have are very much shared. I think everyone would like to have the walls reinstated, repaired. They've been falling down for quite a while on both streets, and we would like to have those back. I think there's a deep appreciation of the heritage character in the HCA by all of us. Certainly my background in heritage has led me to have a great appreciation for this area, and I certainly know that it's reflected in many of the people who live there. This has to be understood in the context of everything getting old and falling down and needing to be rehabilitated and paid for, etc. I think we need entrances that preserve the character of the area but work for 21st century functionality. And I think finally for the HCA, an approvals process and decisions and precedents that are set with regard to that work and that are respected and are not seen as overly onerous and don't end up with many landowners feeling frustrated by them. So I think we all have a very similar, need some more water there? Get you some water. So I think we all have a lot of shared goals, and I would hope that that would be the common ground that we have to move forward here. Next slide, please, or final slide. So I appreciate Council's time to go through this with us. We had a year of work here that we needed to kind of revisit, several trips to the Heritage Commission, obviously a complex process, and people involved feel strongly about this, as they should. And so we hope that Council sees the current design as a gracious update, a gracious gesture that fits with the heritage character as well as with the contemporary character of this unique site, and that its approval is seen as reasonable by the other landowners in there, and that we can get on with repairing the gates and bringing this back to life. I'll end there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Holland, for your and Mr. Luxon for the presentation. Yeah, thank you for that. I'm going to go further quickly here to questions from Council, and then we'll get to members of the public. I think it was a pretty comprehensive overview, certainly. Go ahead, Councillor Green, then Councillor Patterson.
Thank you very much, and through you, Mayor, to Mr. Holland and Mr. Miller, thank you very much for being here tonight, and to Mr. Luxton for his presentation as well. I just have one question, and first of all, let me preface it by saying I am not an expert in welding. I am not an expert in gate design, nor am I an expert in what is required in terms of width of driveways and so on. And I think your presentation was very helpful and comprehensive. But through you, I just wondered if the design that you're showing us tonight, the latest design, is it possible to incorporate an element of the original gates in the center of, is it, they open this way? Would it be possible, a small incorporation of the original gates as a circle in the center of each of the large gates? Would that be possible? I don't know that. I don't know about the structural integrity of gates, you know, in terms of what the requirements are, but for the use. But I just wondered if there was any way that that original design could be incorporated into the center of each of those gates in some small way. So there was some sort of commemoration of what was there, but it doesn't compromise the overall design of what Mr. Miller is putting forward tonight. Just a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Mr. Holland?
Thank you, through your worship. Thank you for the comments. There's probably quite a number of opportunities to change some of this if that's council's will. The design as it's come forward has been thoughtfully worked over with the architect and the applicant, and this is what they're here to propose. But obviously council makes the decision on how this proceeds.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for saying that. I was going to make that reminder as well. At the end of the day, we have to consider the application that's in front of us. But I know there's lots of ways of addressing those sort of pieces. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Holland, Mr. Miller, and Mr. Luxton for the presentation. It's very comprehensive. I do have a question for staff. We heard Mr. Luxton's talk about functional rehabilitation, and so for the functional rehabilitation of these gates and our Heritage Commission's recommendation that the original gates be replicated, what would be the process that would be then expected of an applicant to try to do a functional rehabilitation incorporating the replication but upscaling it for the functionality? I'm not certain how you would achieve that. Would it then have to go back to a design and come back for approvals? Could perhaps staff just explain what would that entail? Because I am not an architect or a designer either, and I can't imagine how you would just upscale a design.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Patterson. Ms. East.
Thank you for the question. Through your worship, Councillor Patterson. The most standard way to respond to that is when council determines, in this case, a particular gate design that it wishes to pursue, could make it a condition of the heritage alteration permit, and then it would be subject to staff to judge, you know, that is both workable in terms of the structure of the gate and also meets the intent of the design that council has expressed. And that would be very similar to earlier this evening. There was a condition on a permit where a design is of in that case another kind of development on a property. The design will be modified to accommodate saving trees. So a condition on the permit, and that could be, we would evaluate that with the experts that we have available in the organization or outside if need be to see if that would work. Alternatively, of course, council could also make a motion to have that design come back to them for that kind of review.
Thank you. I'm going to do a follow-up question to that because I think one of the things I struggle with that idea is there's the idea of replacing something with like for like, but then it has to be changed. So how does a replication at what point is a replication not a replication if it changes its core? Like are you scaling everything proportionally, or are you scaling it wider? Like how is a replication when it's not a replication if it's actually changed? And I've struggled with that concept as well.
Thank you for the question or clarification, Your Worship. I think I cannot explain that any more eloquently than Mr. Luxton has explained this evening. The report in front of you is a recommendation for a more modern design, very much for this challenge that we would face, trying to replicate and also modernize. So I would agree that you cannot perfectly replicate the gates, and if you did, it would not be the true heritage, and it would still have to, even the replication would have to be modified to ensure the structure of the gate would work to the wider widths, and to ensure that the more modern, we've talked about the more modern sort of operation of the gates will work. So there would be some alterations to that.
Thank you for that clarification. That helps. Is there other questions of council to the applicant or staff at this point? If not, I'm happy to go to members of the public and then come back to this table. Councillor Appleton, you look like you have your hand going up. Sort of a hesitant hand going up. Go ahead, Ms. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, and I appreciate that. And I guess I have. It's a difficult question to answer because obviously some of this deals with perception as to what achieves the HCA goals to the greatest extent. I guess what I would ask of the applicant is with respect to the structural design, and this has been touched on already, with respect to the structural design of the gates in order to meet the operational goals that are laid out here, are other materials and designs possible given the same operational parameters? So what is proposed here is a fairly straightforward steel design. Are more reflective, a design that was more reflective of contemporary style, still functional within the operational requirements of the gate?
Mr. Holland, as best you can answer that.
Through your worship, the architect is online with us, and I'm wondering if it would be appropriate if the architect responds to the design question more than myself. Would that be okay?
That would be appropriate.
I believe Marco Simchik is online.
Sure. I think it goes sort of the core. At the end of the day, we're looking at this, whether or not to approve this design. So if there's a general question along those fronts, perhaps a brief overview of the why this design ended up the way it is. So what was the architect's name?
Marco Simchik.
Simchik, Mr. Simchik, are you online and able to?
I might be pronouncing it wrong. He's there. I'm sure he's there.
That's okay. Yeah, I'm here. I'm not sure. Here, I'm on my camera on too. I'm not sure if I completely understood the question. I mean, the simple answer is, of course, yes. There's a myriad of, in fact, infinite number of possible designs. This particular design came out of a specific process that was, marrying a reflection of a sort of historic idiom, but through the lens of contemporary, both design practice and contemporary manufacture processes. So, I mean, I think any architect, any designer undertaking this endeavor would come up with different designs. So there's certainly infinite number of possibilities. So I don't know if there's a more specific question in there that could be re-articulated. I struggle to sort of answer it in a specific way because it really opens up this kind of, the question speaks, I think, more broadly to design process.
Thank you. Councillor Appleton, anything else to follow up?
Yeah, thank you. Just to follow up on that, and I appreciate that. I guess what I would say is, and I am, again, by no means an expert, but if I reflect on the generalized design of gates that are contemporary, that are similar to the original, the materials and the construction thereof may or may not actually suit the function of the gate as intended in this case, as in the materials, the overall weight and gauge of materials or how they're constructed would not necessarily function in this way. So what's being used here is contemporary materials, like modern materials that will function to do the job, and reflect similar finishes, I guess, if you want to call it that. But if you designed a gate with similar gauges and types of materials as the original, you could not get the same function as is what is intended here. So, for instance, you couldn't, not that anybody works in original wrought iron in that same way, but it might not function to do that same purpose.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Just a follow-up question. I think this would probably be directed to Mr. Luxton, and I appreciate Mr. Luxton's comments just about, and I've been interested to hear comments from folks who are obviously experts in the field and experts in heritage, referring, and Mr. Luxton referred on a couple of different occasions of not faking it, essentially of creating something which creates a fake structure, something which is so close to the original, but potentially, ersatz in nature that it potentially detracts. So I'm interested in that concept, and I'm wondering how the interpretation of something which is attempting to replicate original structures lines up with some of the things that are in the national guidelines, which refers to new elements that match the forms, materials, and detailing of sound versions of these same elements, and further, where you have character-defining elements that are too severely deteriorated to repair, to replace them with new elements that match the forms, materials, and detailing of sound versions of the same elements. So I can see both sides of that argument, but I do see in the national guidelines some specific guidance here to attempt to replicate. So those two things appear to stand a bit at odds to me. So I was wondering whether Mr. Luxton might elaborate.
Thank you, Councillor. Go ahead.
Through the chair, I'd be happy to. First of all, it's not as simple as just make it look old. It is actually, there is a question of, if you are intervening into a heritage building, about being honest about it. We try very hard when we have sound repairable elements, like the 95% of the wall that's going to be retained, to repair it. That's obvious. However, it gets more complicated when we get into functional and technical issues. So, for example, if we need to replace a window that's deteriorated, double-hung window, wooden sash, we would hopefully put back a double-hung wooden sash window, but we might double glaze it, make it a little thicker. There may be adjustments, but we can still justify this change within the standards and guidelines. But when we have to do other things to a site, like, as you can imagine, on complex building projects, we have to put in accessibility. We have to put in seismic upgrades. We have to put in all kinds of things that change and alter a heritage structure. If you know the almost complete now custom house project in downtown Victoria, where we had basically blank walls where we had to puncture holes in the base of the building to make it functional. So there's a lot of new gaps in that building that are there so that people can actually use it. And so as we move forward, we do this all the time. And I think, as mentioned by Mr. Holland, you'll see this in the HCA, that some things will be new, some things will be preserved. They should be done sympathetically and appropriately. And I think what you're asking for when you ask, can the gates be, well, can we just fancy it up a bit, or can we make it more like the old ones? We get into territory that becomes very uncomfortable because it doesn't have its own purity. It doesn't then express its time, and it becomes something of a fake or a fraud in terms of, well, this is sort of like the old gates because we didn't quite want to let go of that, but we can't move towards a contemporary expression. So it's like doing an addition to a building and saying, well, make it look like the old one. Well, that's not very good because it distorts the reality of the historic value that we're trying to conserve. So I think, we've been talking a lot about this, but I think you know, at a certain point, it's got to resolve. If you send it back and say, make it look more like the old gates, it's just going to continue to go in a circular manner and not resolve in something that we can look back on and say, wow, that's really appropriate. So I think the answer to the question is that you can't have half a heritage here, and you can't have half a replica, that there's a point at which you kind of break the purity of that concept, and the openings have to be changed. So if we're going to change the opening, should we not have something that expresses its own pure and very simple structural expression? And I will note, and again, I'm not the designer, so I don't want to tread on Mr. Simsek's territory, but I think there's also a code issue here of climbability, that the existing gates were completely climbable, would never meet building code, and therefore they'd have to be fundamentally changed in some way just for functional requirements. So I think when you add all that up, I don't think you can really say there could be a replication here. It just couldn't occur. So the question is, if you're not going to replicate, what is the appropriate expression? And I think we've worked very hard to come back with something that balances those objectives, a reasonable balance between function. These gates are wide, they have to open, they have to be structurally stable, they have to be non-climbable, and what used to be there. And we don't always put what used to be there back in historic sites.
Thank you, Mr. Luxon. I have one more question from Councillor Ney, then I want to go to the, I'll go to, sorry, Mr. Holland, do you wish to add something? Or Mr. Miller?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Appleton. I wonder if I might try to endeavor to answer your question a little more clearly. I think I heard it a little differently. With respect to the gates, I'm looking at them right now, and from the previous meeting here a few months ago, I'm sure Council can recall the complete difference in the gates, just probably off memory alone, with a angular Corten design. So it was quite strong and quite screened at the bottom component of it with some sort of perforated pickets. The new design, I'm wondering if the elephant in the room is when Marco and myself sort of took a big step back and came back to council, what we heard was consider that of the neighborhood, the heritage conservation area. And I know Marco didn't come to the property specifically post the last meeting. However, working in the neighborhood for a number of years, going back probably 5, I think I feel strongly that he understood the request, which is what brought us here today. In fact, looking at the image at 1615, 1660 York, our gate design is strikingly consistent with that. Now, I'm not gonna, Marco would be upset if I told him that he copied it, because that's actually not what he did. But rather what we tried to do was follow with meeting modern requests for widths, which is 14 feet, so it was narrowed 2 feet. And Marco also explained at the previous meeting, and perhaps lost an opportunity at this one, that it's designed to be 9'9" in the smallest component of it. Sorry, in the gate, in the driveway component of it, which is that of the narrowest opening in the heritage conservation area, as well as a 4'3". Sorry, 4'3¼ man gate. And what that is to do is, as Mr. Holland said earlier, cut the openings down from 2, be it a man gate and a vehicle gate, into a combined gate. And then simply put, the design is simply pickets. It's not wrought iron, only because of weight. To your point, I think talked about geometry and strength. If you do it in wrought iron, it just simply gets too heavy, and then you end up with a big wheel to move the gate around. Whereas in this case, our structural engineer has designed a tensioned curve. So this notion of the curve is not just about architectural simulation with the building and its gesture. It's rather under tension to hold the gate up from sagging. So it's meant to be a very less is more approach. It's simply straight pickets with horizontal bars and a curved tension which holds the gate from sagging as it opens and closes manually. Again, it's designed so that under one code, the man gate at only 4'3" can open, so that it's not constantly opening a large opening. Yet, if it's need for pedestrian gate or vehicle delivery, or sorry, vehicle access or say some sort of delivery, then they both can open. So it's really meant to serve two purposes without opening up the entire gate and creating a more intimate environment. And again, looking at the other than the curb lines, it's just straight pickets, which we thought would be a less is more approach, and in fact not detract away from the other gate design, as you recall, was Corten, very strong in nature, very bold. This one is, we thought, would take almost a subdued, I think Donald used the word subordinate, but a subdued approach. In other words, we're trying to make it as simple as possible, thus to not offend anyone. I hope that answers your question a little bit more clearly. It was a very long-winded answer.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Heritage people always use the word subdue or subservient. That's just the nature of the beast.
I would have stumbled on that one for sure.
I just need a motion. I do want to wrap this up at a reasonable hour, but it's coming up on 9 o'clock. Can I get a motion to extend to 9:30, and we'll try and complete this. Moved and seconded. Any discussion on the extension? All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. So we'll go to 9:30. Can I had Councillor Ney, you had a question, and then I want to get to the public as well.
Okay, yeah, I'll just very quickly, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Luxton and Holland, for the overview and interpretations and helping us understand how to apply these principles in the various guidelines. I found that very useful, and thanks to the council for the questions, because I found this very helpful in terms of the design. My question right now that I was curious about has to do with the openings, the distance of the openings. So I first want to ask a question to staff. In one of the recommendations that came from the Heritage Commission, they're recommending that the rock wall be limited to a minimum bylaw requirement. What is that? Is there a number of the bylaw requirement? This is to staff.
Sure, thank you, Councillor Ney. Ms. East?
Through your worship to Councillor Ney. No, there is no bylaw requirement for the openings in the rock wall. They are going to be relative to the functionality of getting in and out of the property, and otherwise subject to council's preference.
Okay, thank you very much. And can I also ask, sorry, just a sec. Sorry.
If you lost your question, I can come back to you in a moment, Councillor Ney.
Yeah, no, the question has to do with I'm wondering if there's any specification around the width of the openings that were originally assigned to the application, or was that ever determined at any point? I was just wondering.
I think you're referring to the original building permit process where
Yeah.
they got approval for the openings in the wall?
Yes.
Ms. East, is there any width attached to those?
Sure. Through your worship to Councillor Ney, I think what you might be referring to is there was a permit for a driveway width across the boulevard on public property, and so there are widths associated with that approval. It's for the vehicular driveways across the boulevard are 4.9 meters. And the approval on the pedestrian side is 1.8 meter across the boulevard, although I do know the applicant is thinking about making that more narrow as well. But those were the approvals through an engineering permit strictly related to the crossing of the boulevard. So the wall needs to relate to the location, the openings in the wall need to relate to those locations, but there's lots of flexibility related to the opening width of the wall.
Thank you, Ms. East.
Okay, and then just finally to Mr. Luxton and or Mr. Holland, with regards to the width openings, is there anything in the guidelines that provides that helps inform what those width openings are? I mean, you've done a nice survey of all the other properties to try to create, I presume, some kind of context and comparative, analysis that you've presented. But can you just say a little bit more about how you're assessing that within the context of the guidelines you have before you?
Sure,
or is
thank
it
you.
relevant? Maybe it's not relevant. I'm not sure.
I'll go to Mr. Luxton just to answer the question in terms of the wall openings. Mr. Luxton?
Certainly, through the mayor to Councillor Ney, the answer is no. So we often, an example would be as we provide accessibility to buildings, we often find that, we need a 3-foot door. Most doors from 1912 were 2'8". So very often we have to take the door out and replace it with a wider door. It's exactly the same situation. So there is no sort of mandate that thou shalt do the following. The guidelines are guidelines. They're normative. They give good guidance. So we would look to the standards, which are the principles for help in this. And that is why when we do change something, and we often do in heritage situations, that is standard 4, that we do not want to create the false sense of history. So one of the things that I think is really critical, and I know this is a difficult discussion to kind of bring to conclusion, but the answer is that what you want to kind of achieve through the standards and guidelines is that whatever you do, if you change as little as you have to, but everything that you must change for functional reasons. And we do it constantly in our work on heritage sites. So the answer is, if we have a new opening, essentially this is a new opening, the old gates aren't appropriate. And so what the contemporary design is an attempt to insert into this historic context something sympathetic that reads without drawing attention to itself. So I think it's really critical when you look at the design of the new gates, that when we're looking at compliance to standards and guidelines, that we are trying to actually keep things as simple as possible. We don't try and overcomplicate. So the idea of trying to do an Art Nouveau gate but bigger out of the wrong materials.
Mr. Luxton, I think you've answered the question. I'm cognizant of time here, so I think you're repeating comments already made. So I'm just going to move back to this table. Thank you for that answer.
I apologize. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to make a call. If anybody's watching and wishes to use the 1855 number to address council, this is the time to hit *9, and your hand will get raised within our meeting here. And if there's maybe if you want to sit at the chairs there, if people are coming in, I'm not sure if anybody they are going to come into the room. That gives some space for residents to come and address. So anybody who's currently located in the hall that wishes to address council is free to do so. Are we going to go in and take them in one at a time? Is that the process? Sorry, we're out of practice here. We haven't done these people in the chambers for a very long time. Yeah, maybe we can do that. In fact, I might just do that. I might just move this table so that we can. Is there a chair there though? There's no one who wishes to address? Okay. There are on Zoom, yeah. So I have on my screen here, the first is a faucet. If you could just unmute yourself and give your name and municipality of residence, and you're welcome to address council through me and or ask questions if you wish, and we can have those answered. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My name is Pam Fawcett. I'm here with my husband, Mark Larige. We live in Oak Bay, where our address is 2390 San Carlos Ave. And basically, we're right at the end of Prospect as you curve to go to Beach Drive. And so I just wanted to first of all say that we are in favor of the proposal put forth for the new fence, and I guess gate, not fence, I'm sorry. And just to give a few points as to why, I mean, our perspective is, you know, we're homeowners, heritage house ourselves, not just that we live in the HCA, but we have a heritage home prior to HCA. And so our perspective is someone who lives in the neighborhood. And I know there's lots of technical information that was provided that is outside of my realm, but it all sounded good. I'll just keep that simple. I do say that for years we've been hearing about this property, and it's been about the wall, the wall, the wall. And I think for me, when I think about what is being proposed, the wall is going to be so fantastic, presumably that Mike Miller is going to repair it, restore it, make it beautiful like it once was. That's really going to still be the main feature to me, and that you still have this new gate, which is in keeping with many other designs, especially on York Street. So I still look at the wall versus the gate. I know they're kind of one and the same into some regards, but anyways, that one point. My other comment, and it's a bit of a concern, is around this notion of, can the look of this gate be changed, the design change? And as was suggested, I guess that's possible, but then where does it end? I mean, you know, so the design is changed, it comes back to council supposedly, and it's still not going to meet everyone's preference for what it should look like. So I guess I would have a concern as a homeowner that if should I at some point want to put up a gate on my property, that, you know, I might be tied to certain standards that were so long ago. I will always want to make sure that something is honoring heritage, which I think this proposal does. But I'm concerned that it's a bit arbitrary in terms of what's the right design, as opposed to what has the homeowner done. And in this case, they've done a lot of research to try and provide something that honors heritage, but also meets functionality and contemporary build. So I guess that's all I just wanted to add from our perspective as homeowners. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Fawcett, for calling in. I have a phone number ending in 3247. If you could hit *6 to unmute. I don't think I can unmute you, so just hit *6. There we go. If you could just again state your name and municipality of residence, and then comments or questions are welcome.
Yes, hi. My name is Barb Grant. I live in the Heritage Conservation Area, and my address is 1538 Beach Drive. Mayor and Council, Prospect is a special area deserving special treatment. Much time, public money, and public effort has been invested in its care. The HCA guidelines give you a blueprint for decision-making on its behalf. Today you have the opportunity to preserve a fascinating historic streetscape of interest and benefit to the community. Definition of streetscape in the Prospect's Statement of Significance refers to the gates and stone walls as street furniture, which, with other visual elements like sidewalks, buildings, trees, and plantings, combine to form the street's character. Streetscapes are so important, they are referred to over 30 times in the HCA guidelines. The applicant proposes to restore the historic walls. Please encourage the applicant to restore the historic gates as well, thus reestablishing the community's historic streetscape. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Grant, and of course we received your written correspondence as well. So moving on to, I think it was, I'll go to Terry. If you could again unmute on your computer. There we go. Again, just state your name and municipality of residence, and then feel free to address council through me.
Great. Hi, my name is Terry Cambitas, and I am the homeowner of 1526 Beach Drive, right next door to Barb. I'm also in the HCA. Thank you for allowing me to speak this evening, because I was not informed of this issue coming up to council, and I would like the opportunity to have my say. I am one of the other owners who does support the updated gate design on 1561 York Place. And I want to assure council that this particular homeowner is being targeted and that not everyone in the HCA agrees with the certain people who are targeting him. The HCA has enacted to protect heritage character, but not to be a straitjacket that tries to lock all the properties in the HCA into a 100-year-old time capsule. Change is inevitable. It happens every day. The updated gate design is a beautiful design that both reflects the heritage character of the walls and the area while integrating with the design of the new home. They will keep the heritage values and increase the land values of everyone in the HCA if they are installed. Please understand that this decision is one of the first out the door. The rest of us are bound to follow in some way or the other with our own properties. It's fine to protect general heritage character, but council needs to understand it is setting a precedent for every single other person who owns land in this HCA by having to work off some old artifact if found. The HCA is full of old houses, and there are many changes that will need to be done within our walls, gates, landscaping, garages, and at the interpretation of the HCA and related policies needs to be done reasonably while respecting the needs of landlords and landowners and modern life. Speaking as a landowner, everyone else in the HCA, I do not appreciate the negative drain on our home values that draconian interpretation of the HCA will have on our property value or reasonable ability to update, enjoy, or sell our properties one day ourselves. Council needs to see past the weaponizing of heritage guidelines against this owner and to think about all the rest of us who are also landowners in the HCA as well. I encourage council to listen to the highly respected professional heritage expert on this project who recommends the approval of these gates because they are a reasonable expression of the heritage protection policy. Please allow these beautiful gates to be installed so that we can enjoy the beauty in our neighborhood. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just going to ask everybody just to speak to the merits of the application and not delve into any side issues or politics that are going on, just out of respect to everybody. I have next up I think it's a phone number ending in 8184 is the next speaker. If you could hit, here we go. We just unmuted yourself. Thank you. Feel free to introduce yourself, name and municipality of residence is all we require, and then feel free to address council through me.
Hi, my name is Don Bieberdorf. I'm a resident at 1564 Prospect Place and part of the HCA. I'm here to say that we agree with the proposal as articulated. We think it's consistent with the heritage conservation area. Sorry, I'm just going to unmute. We think it's consistent with the heritage character of the area. We think it's a beautiful design, and we're really happy with the compromise as compared to the original proposal. We do think, though, that the larger issue here is the interpretation of the HCA as a governing document for our neighborhood. We think that the planner's approach is very reasonable, and it doesn't refer to what happens in a particular property, what the history of a particular property is, but rather looks to the neighborhood as a whole and what has been done and what is being done in the neighborhood. We ourselves are considering the installation of a gate, and we can't imagine what else we could do than what the applicant has done in this case, but to look to the heritage value of the neighborhood and heritage character of the neighborhood, and come up with a proposal that is consistent with that and sympathetic to the surroundings, and in this case the wall. So we're all in favor of the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bieberdorf. I have Chris Hemian is showing on the Zoom call. If you wish to address council, you can unmute yourself and just address, again, state your name and municipality of residence, and we will take your comments through me.
Hello, Chris Hemian, 2414 San Carlos Avenue.
Welcome, Mr. Hemian.
I'm sorry, I can barely hear you. It's been very difficult.
Welcome, Mr. Hemian.
Okay, thank you. I also live in a heritage home on San Carlos, and I just want to be very brief, but say that I am in favor of the proposal. I think it's well designed. I think it'll fit nicely into the wall, and I think that the homeowner should have, a lot of say in his own design. And I would appreciate council moving this forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hemian. Just going to reach out if there's any other members of the public who wish to address council before I come back to this table for comments and direction. Is there someone? No, I think. Is there a phone number 3485? I don't see it on my screen, so my apologies. Is there a phone number 3485 that is trying to reach in?
Excuse me, Your Worship. Yes, they've just come into the meeting.
Okay, great. So please just state your name and municipality of residence, and then address your comments through council. So this is the person with phone number ending in 3485. You're welcome to address council.
Yeah.
Just the person with the phone number ending in 3485. We can hear you. You're not muted.
I don't know.
Oh, I see. We have Mr. Prince. I think you're on twice. If that's your phone number, but we can see your. I'll mute your the phone and Mr. Prince. Did you wish to address council?
Yes.
No. Mr. Prince, are you? If you could just unmute yourself before you. There we go. If you could just state your name and municipality of residence, and then you're welcome to address council.
No, it's Mike. What's your number, Mike?
Mr. Prince, we can hear you if you just speak to your screen.
Oh.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Thank you for your patience. I would just like to say to council two or three things. One, I feel that there's a governance gap in what has taken place here in this process. Since you last looked at this application last time, it went immediately to the Heritage Commission within the next 24 or 48 hours. It was an expedited process. Credit to both staff and the Heritage Commission, as well, of course, a highly motivated applicant and his hired consultants. And it's moved through. I heard Mr. Holland say a number of times the feeling mystified and confused and unsure as to what the meaning of the Heritage Commission's recommendations were, because it was a rather brief meeting. I would feel that they've had a more than ample opportunity tonight to make a very fulsome presentation to you, Council. Mr. Luxton, Mr. Holland, the architect briefly, and Mr. Miller himself. The trouble is that the recommendation of the Heritage Commission is just that. It's on paper to you. You are deprived of the opportunity of a proper balanced conversation between the applicant and his hired consultants and our very Heritage Commission and the volunteer experts on that who made a recommendation. I would suggest that you return it back to the Heritage Commission so that that fulsome conversation take place between the experts. More than one of you tonight, councillors, have said, I am not an expert on this. Of course you're not. Send it back to the commission where the expertise is. I would love to see a conversation between Mr. Luxton and his old colleague and friend, Pam Madoff, on the interpretation of the national standards and guidelines. Let that debate be had, as Mr. Holland said. Let the conversation be had, not to prejudge the outcome. This is, as Mr. Holland said, he warned you about that this might set all sorts of precedents. Well, I think there's a risk here of a governance precedent being set that really hobbles a unanimous, thoughtful recommendation from your heritage tradition that then it lacks any voice tonight by the very people who made that recommendation to you based on their best judgment and expertise. The applicant has had ample time tonight to provide you presentations and slides and answers and so forth, but you do not have the benefit of the other voices. I say have that conversation where it should be back to the Heritage Commission. They moved quickly for you last time. I think they can move quickly for you again. And I will leave it at that. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prince, for your comments and for joining us this evening. Are there any other members of the public? I appreciate technology can sometimes get in the way that wish to address council. I want to give that opportunity. But I don't see other hands being raised at this point. So we are going to bring it back to this table for direction.
Yeah, if I could, I think you missed me last time.
Sorry, Councillor Braithwaite.
That's okay. So I just had a question to, two questions. Because 1616 to 1660, the York Place got brought up, and the fact that they have gates there, and I think there probably was original gates there. I'm not sure if anybody on staff knows that, but I think they might have been McClure gates that were there, and I'm thinking that the design of the gates that are there now are consistent with what the gates were there before, but sadly I don't know. I think we'd have to go into archives to look that up. So, but does staff have any idea on that?
Through your worship, I don't have those images in front of me, but I would refer back to the presentation if possibly. I believe they had images of those gates.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Yeah, they do have images of the current gates, but I'm talking about the images of the original gates.
I believe they have images of the original.
There are, but also I would just, if you go to the correspondence, somebody sent a email with a picture attached that you can have a look at a bit more detail.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question is, I think Ms. West talked about being able to put a condition on the permit to have the design based on the original design, not a replication, because as we've heard from Mr. Luxton, that's, you don't want anything to be fake or distorted, but something that's based on the original design, not a replication. So something like what Councillor Green was perhaps talking about, taking some of those original aspects into account, maybe benefiting from some of the historical photos or something that could be implemented into the gates a little bit. I would imagine that that's possible, even to keep them current and with the materials that they're looking at using. So I'm wondering, Ms. West, is that what I heard you say about being able to do something like that, putting that on a permit?
Go ahead, Ms. East.
East, yes. Yeah, it didn't even faze me. Through your worship, I would suggest that if council has a design in mind that they wish to describe and make a decision on this evening, that we could capture that as a condition of the permit, and cause that to happen with our review and before the issuance of the permit.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, that's good. I take that into consideration. It was interesting to hear the comments that we just heard from some of the residents around there. I do take into consideration whether or not this does set a precedent. And when I look at a property that's also owned by this proponent, which is 1558, whether or not that, so whatever we do here, will that kind of carry over onto another property within the HCA? And so I worry a little bit about that, and I'm not really sure what to do with that information. So something to mull about.
This is why we get paid the big dollars here to Since you come up with these answers, at the end of the day, we have to give some recommendations. I'm just going to just cognizant of time. I know we've already accepted this once. I don't want to spend more time than we have to. So I want to get to motions and consideration here. I just want to remind we have the wall restoration, the opening sizes, and the gates as sort of the three pieces that we have to give some direction on. And so I'd like to. Questions are good, and if there's additional pieces, then go ahead, Councillor Green. I will need another motion to extend to 9:45. Is that moved to 9:45? Any discussion on that? All right, all those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed. Let's try and get through our business here. Councillor Ney, you're up.
Well, I was just going to put the motion, the staff recommendation motion on the table for discussion, Mr. Mayor. So, if I may.
Sorry, I hit the wrong button there for a second. So you're moving the staff recommendation. Thank you. Is there a seconder? We can have a debate. It's moved and seconded. Thank you. Councillor Ney, you have the floor. Is there anything you wish to add to your motion?
So it's in two parts, Mr. Mayor. So one is to receive it, and then the other is the staff recommendation. Do you want it all in one piece, or do you want it in two?
You know what? I'll call the question on the move to receipt first. So let's just do that procedurally. So we have to take motion to receive. I'll sever them. All those in favor of receipt? Any opposed? Not opposed? Thank you. Go ahead. And then so now we're dealing with the second part, which is the staff recommendation. Go ahead, Councillor Ney.
So I guess I'm being persuaded by what I've seen here, what I've heard from the staff, and what I've heard from the consultants. And in my view here, the proposal on the table, this has been a long time coming. This has been going on for some time, and it seems to me we've consulted with the commission. We've brought it back here. The applicant has responded with an altered design that I agree bridges the between the heritage and the modern. It's a compromised design. Personally, I like the first one, but it's not for me to say. I'm not a designer and I don't get paid to do that. But it does seem to me that this is a compromise that I've heard fits with the guidelines and seems to me to fit with the context as well as the development that's underway. So the issue of going back to the Heritage Commission, I appreciate the issue, but we've got the Commission's recommendations here. This is where they've landed, and based on the discussions and the explanations about the application and interpretation of the guidelines, I'm satisfied that this proposal and the design will set a precedent that shows consideration and respect for the heritage elements, as well as variations in architecture that in that architectural design. So I'm going to support this. Those are my reasons for supporting this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Ney. I have Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you. And yeah, I think that where we've come to from where we were, we've gone a long ways. And I would agree that, well, I think the design is better than what it was before. But again, I'm not an expert like Councillor Ney. However, I do kind of go back to the comments that we heard in regards to that we haven't really had a fulsome conversation with our Heritage Commission on this. And I kind of took the words of Mr. Prince to heart when we've had a really great presentation from the proponent, but have we actually had the opportunity to hear really what the Heritage Commission says on this? And so I I think that I need to hear that. For me to be able to move forward with this, I need to hear that. And so I think that I want to follow the counsel of our Heritage Commission, and so I'm going to have to vote against this, even though I do like the design of these gates far better than what I did before. I think we're going in the right direction. I would like to see them a little bit more based on the historical gates that were there. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important because we have to give as clear a direction as possible. I don't want to kind of leave sort of generalized comments out there. So I just want to make sure, let's just talk about the pros and cons of approaches to this, and then we'll do it by resolution here to give that guidance and to move it forward just for as much clarity as possible. Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and I really appreciate all of the information that has been presented here tonight. I do also value the expertise of the Heritage Commission and what they, what they try to guide in their decisions. The problem that I have with this is that it has been to the Heritage Commission. I did, go on Zoom to hear what the conversation was about this. But the difficulty is there's no specificity to work to in the outcome of that. It talks about replication, but because we can't meet the function and by just trying to replicate the old gates, and because there was no specification on what they would want to see in how that would transition into an upscaled version or modern materials, there's nothing to work to. And I can see where this would go back and forth, and what we need to, I think, have for the applicant is some certainty to what we want, and without having received those instructions from the Heritage Commission, I feel that I will support staff's recommendation on this to allow it to move forward. I think there's been compromises made with the change in design on the gates and the reduced width of the gates. Certainly the presentation tonight, and I walk the area quite frequently. So the gates that are proposed, while they may not replicate the original gates, they are in keeping, I think, with the context of the neighborhood, and it will allow this to move forward. I think allow the rock walls, which to me are the really important piece, the real heritage piece, is the rock walls, and that will be, those will be put back into good condition so that all of the streetscapes are, are integrated to a much more appealing fashion than they are right now, because it's been a long time since all of those were complete. I also listened to some of the comments from other people who live in the heritage conservation area, and I understand their concerns about what future changes they have to make, and how those things will be considered, and how they will respond to functional rehabilitation. So I see this as a bit of a compromise that allows this to be completed in a way that really, I think, speaks to the integrity of the neighborhood. So for those reasons, and to see it completed, I'm supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I have Councillor Zelka, then Green.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I very much appreciate all the conversation and all the comments. I am loath to vote against the advice from our Heritage Commission, and I very much appreciate the input that they've provided on this. I understand the design. In fact, I very much appreciate the new design. I have to agree, it's getting closer to something that looks much better to me. I wish that there was at least an homage to Art Nouveau in the design, something to hold on to the sort of design elements from the original gate. I wish that would be something that I would be looking for if I was going to offer some advice. But on balance, I'm afraid I'm going to have to vote against. It's just not quite there enough for me. I do appreciate also that I thank you for making it narrower than the original design. I do note from the reviews through you, Chair, to the proponent that it's still much wider than almost all the other gates, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, since it looks like the approval has been given for 4.3 meters, which gives you your 14 feet. So that's something that probably won't change going forward. But I would definitely love to see a design that was just a little closer to the original, if possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Councillor Green.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to everyone who has participated in this conversation tonight, especially to the applicant, the consultants, and so on, and the comments of my colleagues. This is a tough one. I'm a former member of the Heritage Commission. I have huge respect for them. I value their advice and guidance always. But I'm also reminded that this has been going on for a very long time. And I'm also reminded that the applicant has made three concessions that seem to be important to the neighborhood. I am reminded there are new voices tonight speaking in favor of the design that is presented. And I know how much all of this means, and it has been a very emotional issue, and it remains emotional, I'm sure, for a number of people. But I guess my sense of needing to bring some closure to the issue, I agree with Councillor Patterson. I think the restoration of the walls is key. They have been kind of an open wound on the street for some time. They need to be finished and completed and restored. They mean a lot to a lot of people. I think the gate design, and I'm again not an expert in design, but I think this gate does mirror some of the other features at other properties along the way. And it also enables people to see through, which I think was an important feature, that it doesn't feel like a fortress from York Place. People can see through, and there is a pedestrian gate, I gather, that will be replaced as well. So this is a really hard decision, but I'm going to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I appreciate my colleagues and others' comments. Mr. Prince, who called in, talking about the discussion at the Heritage Commission table. So as liaison, I appreciate the comments about paying close attention to the input of the Heritage Commission. And I will note that when this initially came forward, that the Commission did at one juncture ask for more time or defer the subject for discussion when the original design came. So they have cast their minds to considering this carefully. So the challenge here is being the liaison and having been privy and obviously attending the discussion around this topic is that we find ourselves at odds. You can see the recommendation and the motion from the Heritage Commission, and the Heritage Commission is fairly direct in their comment to say that the gates as originally designed to be reinstated is the motion from the Heritage Commission. And what we have heard when we contrast that with what we've heard here tonight to say, and I think what I heard from the Commission at that time as well, I don't want to speak for them, but what was conveyed out of that was that the proposal, the design that is in front of Council tonight, did not go far enough to achieve that heritage design or to achieve that objective. The challenge that we have is that, as some people have alluded to, when you go down that road as far as what would be considered reflective enough of the original design when we understand that for a number of reasons that can't be fully achieved with the design that's with current standards, building standards and protective standards, then it returns to a bit of a judgment decision. And so in as much as I always value the direction and the interest in referring materials back to our advisory committees and commissions with that expertise, in this particular case, this now rests with council. This is, the commission has provided their motion and has clearly conveyed their position on this. And so it does raise the specter of having several cycles of back and forth as far as design as to what constitutes a more heritage oriented design, or what is, has been described, a fake or not true to the original. So in this particular case, and in as much as I am the Heritage Liaison and I pay very close attention and very close heed to what the Heritage Commissioners are saying, what is in front of us, I believe is, and I will be honest here with the applicant and with staff, it is a compromise. It is in a lot of ways an unsatisfactory compromise, and a lot of people in the community will consider it such. So I am not totally satisfied with the design. I would have liked to have seen something that captured, that reflected people's concerns about the streetscape better. But I think that on balance, I can support the resolution on the table in order to move the project forward, get the walls restored, get the area back to looking like the community expects it to look, and achieve a balance. But ultimately, I make that, I'm in support with a great deal of reservation about what I feel is in a lot of ways a pretty
Councillor,
unsatisfactory
sorry to
compromise.
interrupt, but I just need another motion to extend to 10, moved and seconded. Sorry, I know this is, but just want to completely wrap this up. So is there any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you. Sorry, keep going.
Sorry, and I appreciate that. Thank you, Your Worship. I'll just make one point in addition to this, and I have obviously learned a great deal and paid close attention to everybody who's contributed to this discussion. What I think is very critical at this point, what it's underscored for me, is the significance and importance of specificity in the statements of significance and in the HCA guidelines for things which are ancillary elements. We are dealing with ancillary and peripheral. If we're talking about architectural design standards for a building, replicating or upgrading an older building, the standards are more easily applied. This is a very difficult challenge because this is an ancillary element, and it speaks to elements like streetscape, which we consider to be important but are difficult to define. So I think this has been a learning experience, I think, for council and as the district as a whole, as we roll out these HCA guidelines and HCA standards, that this particular type of situation with ancillary structures is not easy to define, and we may want to cast our minds to greater detail and greater direction in the standards to address these types of situations. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Just cognizant of time, I'll keep my comments reasonably brief. I look at this as it was interesting. I went back through the standards and guidelines for the conservation of historic places and these pieces to look at it. It does clearly fall under rehabilitation. When I look at the wall restoration, the opening sizes, and the gates, the wall restoration's a no-brainer. I think I appreciate the opening sizes changes that have been made. Like I said before, personally, I think York should be wider. The prospect could be narrower. But at the end of the day, we have a proposal in front of us that makes a good effort to address the issues, and profession should not be the enemy of the good in these things. So, and I do think we have a responsibility to be timely as much as anything else in these things to address the concerns of the neighbors about this should be a positive process. And this one, I think, caught fairly sort of partway between the pre-HCA and post-HCA is there. So really the question comes down to the gates. And I see, both arguments being made. I think, Councillor Appleton, you pointed this out. You could make an argument that you could do restoration. It would be difficult, I would say, in this place, but you could make that case it would comply. Then the other is to make it distinct and in more of the time, which is what's been proposed here in front of us. I do feel personally, having read through all of that and looked at the details and the recommendation from Heritage, that recommendation of a replica doesn't sit well with me. I can't see how it could scale. I think that at the end of the day, because if you look at the guidelines, it does say replacement in kind when it talks about those replacements under those standards, and this would not be replacement in kind. It would be replacement close to in kind, but not quite in kind. And so I take those words, quite sincerely, and I share. I think this is these gates have been redesigned to be practical and to be subservient. It puts the focus back on the walls and not on the gate. For better or for worse, that is the result of this. I can live with that. I think that at the end of the day, we're here to adjudicate proposals put in front of us, and I'm very wary of trying to go back and forth on a design by committee process, back and forth with Heritage and with the applicant. I think the applicant feels comfortable with these and it moves them forward. Frankly, at the end of the day, if this moves forward and the applicant, having listened to this, says, you know what, maybe I would consider a change of that, they can always come back. They already have the approval in their pocket to go forward as it is, and that's something they could consider. But at the end of the day, looking at the proposal that's in front of us and based on all of the information that's been discussed here tonight, and it's been a lot, I fall down on the side of supporting the application that's in front of us. So there we go. Any other discussion before I call the question? Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Thank you. Just very quickly, I liked Councillor Zelka's word of, the word he used was homage. If there is any way there could be some homage integrated into that new design, and you have photos of the original gates, I mean, if there was any way that could be reflected to pay homage to what was there, that would be wonderful. But I realize we have to approve what's before us. Thank you.
We have to decide whether to approve in front of us. Be careful of our words here. Any other discussion on this matter? I don't see any, so I'll call the question. All of those in favor of the recommendation? And those opposed? I register Councillor Zelka and Councillor Braithwaite as opposed. That carries. So the Heritage Alteration Permit is approved. Thank you so much. This has been a long process that you guys have gone through back and forth, and appreciate the efforts made to accommodate the reflections of the comments made at the last meeting. So thank you for that. We have a couple of other items to get through, I think, fairly quickly here. I'll let you leave, but I'm going to continue the meeting just so we can meet our timelines. I don't think there's any new business from council. So we have just a notice of motion from Councillor Patterson. This was gone through to staff already for just review, so it's for consideration, I think, tonight. Is that correct, Ms. Williams? Sorry, the notice of motion that's here. Are we just reading the notice of motion, or are we actually considering this as part of our deliberations tonight?
The motion is before you for deliberation and a decision tonight.
That's my understanding as well. So, so it's had a chance to go through staff and come back here. Councillor Patterson, I don't think you don't need to read the whereases. Perhaps you can read the motion into the record, and if there's a seconder, we can get.
Be it therefore resolved that staff draft for council deliberation a debt management policy that outlines the purpose, responsibilities, approval process, guiding principles, and objectives for borrowing limits and term of borrowing, and prepared in accordance with recommended best practices on debt management policies, and provides a comparison of the broad objectives from other local government debt policies.
And is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. I just want to give a couple of words here, Councillor Patterson.
If I may speak to it, thank you, Mayor. And municipalities throughout Canada actually have very good credit ratings for 3 reasons: strong provincial regulation, stable revenues, and good financial management policies and planning. In the financial plan, the 2022-2026 financial plan that we in fact just approved to go forward to drafting a bylaw, we are departing a bit from Oak Bay's fairly lengthy now period of not having debt in the community. Our debt servicing liability has been very far from what we could have, and but nevertheless, in this year's plan, it's as is outlined in the plan, we will be at about 5.3% of our annual liability servicing limit. So that's higher than what we have had for quite some time. And also, just in comparison, you know, we could go up to 12 million, and we're significantly below that at 633,000. But at 5.3%, and you look at other municipalities within this region, Salish, for instance, caps their limit at 7%. So we are then getting higher in comparison to other municipalities in this region. And I think as we undertake, this council has been very proactive in contributing to reserve funds, in having discussions about what the future holds, and the need to perhaps use debt to get to goals that we will be talking about and developing further. But along with that, I think a debt policy is a good thing to have, and something that we need to have further discussion at council about. And my recommendation on this one is, when staff bring it back, I would think that it would probably require its own meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pasha. I just want to go to Mr. Payne here. Obviously, as the person required to implement this. Any additional comments on this item?
Your Worship, no, the motion is timely. I think as staff are working towards accelerating infrastructure replacement, you know, we are forecasting reserve balances aren't going to be able to sustain that level of capital replacement. So debt management policy would be timely.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Zelka?
Thank you, Chair, and I absolutely agree. It is timely. This is an area that I certainly don't have expertise in, because Oak Bay generally has not had debt over the years. Of course, we haven't, and probably as a result, our asset management is in the state it's in. So, yes, it would be very helpful to know not only the questions here, but also what are some of our other nearby local authorities doing, and how are they doing it? So, yeah, I guess aspects of best practices, I would definitely need to get myself up to speed on these aspects, so to be able to understand what our Director of Financial Services will be talking to us about in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Councillor Green?
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor, and I really appreciate my colleagues' attempt here to bring some balance and some greater scrutiny, but also I appreciate her collaboration with our director, Mr. Payne, and his input was appreciated tonight, so I will be supporting the motion.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion on the motion? Don't see any, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed? That carries. I just need a motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? Just a reminder that we are scheduled to go pop back into in-camera briefly after this meeting, so we'll leave the Zoom meeting and come back in through our other tool for that. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great evening, and we will see you all. I don't know when our next meeting is, to be totally honest. No, we don't have one on Monday, but I think at least it's 2 weeks away, I believe, but we may have some intervening ones. Yeah, thank you.